Generally, you said feminism is neutral.
Here's what actually happened.
The foundation of all knowledge.
Money. I'm really mad that
this is how men
what difference does it make, right? What
Stop.
Stop.
the deregulation of the industry is obviously going to cause more of that industry.
And to lubricate the trust connection between people until they have enough.
Yet we could still look at biological reality in determining who's a female, even if there are.
Why don't you denounce feminism the same way you're denouncing capitalism? If you don't...
For something to be objective, it needs to be verifiable. And you can't verify...
If I make a claim as a political pundit, it is true that I definitely could be wrong.
Yeah,
you're promoting, right?
Ideology is the main tenet of politics, right? This is my ideology.
So 2015, anyone go back and watch the footage? The first GOP debate.
Cool, Robert. Oh, that? We're a crowbar, you said.
And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. I am Sarah, the Raging Tomato, bringing to you another live debate. Our Throwdown Thursday got moved to Friday, so bear with me. We're going to have some fun tonight. Joy, what's that? Can you hear me? Asher? Can you hear me? You can't hear me. Go out and come back in. Let's do this. Sorry. My apologies, ladies and gentlemen. Quick technical difficulties. Go out and come back in. It's always the cell phones that get us here. Okay. Hopefully that will settle it. Let's just wait for him to come back. Asher, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah.
I can't hear anybody.
Okay, no, I'm gonna kick. That's okay.
I can text him.
There we go. We'll do it this way.
Go out and come back in.
Leave the StreamYard and come back. This right here.
Okay, go ahead and come back in.
Yes, that's okay. It happens. It happens anytime there's a cell phone and somebody new gets added to the show. For some reason, I don't know why StreamYard does this, but it always cuts all audio when you've been added to the stage. So we might have that technical difficulty later during Q&A, but we can work through it. Not an issue. But joining me this evening, of course, is Asher. He's coming in to defend the Talmud, and Israel on the other side. He has been here before, so we're going to welcome him back to the screen. He did a Throwdown Thursday here recently. And Asher is new to Mater Nation. Both gentlemen do have their channels that Uncle Guns is so kindly dropping the link into the chat. So if you want to go subscribe, like, and send all of your love their way, that would be wonderful. Can you hear me now, Asher?
I could. Hi.
Perfect. All right. It's just a cell phone issue. It's commonly known. No worries. All right. Is the Talmud a holy book for Jews? That is the question this evening. Asher, if you'd like to begin with your opening statement, please.
Sure. Do I start with an introduction or do I hop into the topic?
Feel free to introduce yourself. Tell them where they can find you, send your love, or whatever you want to do. And then, go into the claim.
Sure. My name is Rabbi Asher Meza. I am the founder of Torah Judaism International. Our website is torahjudaism.com. We are Orthodox, but we are globally minded. We educate anyone who's interested in Judaism, traditional Orthodox Judaism, more from, like we like to say, from a Maimonidean perspective, like a more rational perspective. And the opinions you're going to hear from me are more from the rationalist camp. Judaism, especially Orthodox Judaism, is quite colorful. Those Jews who are more mystically inclined will have a different rendition of what people call the oral law than people who are more rationally based, people who are more students of Maimonides, which is the camp I belong to. So I'm not in any way trying to speak for every branch of Orthodox Judaism, but in my opinion, at least the one that's the most grounded, based on what we consider source material instead of, let's say, revelation and mystical ideas. So on that note, does Judaism consider the oral law holy? Orthodox Judaism, at least? Yes, it does. Now, by holy, we don't necessarily mean that it fell down from heaven. If we're going to define holy as something set apart, something useful, especially in this area, in the ways of God, from any theological aspect, then absolutely, we use it as a guide. We feel that it's authorized, although not necessarily given by God. It was put together by men who were authorized to judge. And we're going to get into this whole procedure and how someone becomes a judge that doesn't exist nowadays. It actually ceased to exist in the 4th century of the Common Era. So if someone wants to say that it is holy in the sense that it's set apart and sanctioned, yes, it is. Not necessarily that it was divinely inspired, even given by Moses, which is probably the most popular rendition that people give over when trying to describe the oral law, that brings a lot of pushback. And I'm trying to, in some way, mend those holes during this discussion. So let me explain a little bit on how it's set apart. The Torah gives us many commandments that are ceremonial, that are meant to be kept as a nation. There are many punishments for breaking these particular ceremonial commands that would be hard to implement if there wasn't some consensus on how to keep ceremonial commands. So we believe that what people call the oral law, in my opinion, erroneously called the oral law. It's never called the oral law in the Mishnah or in the Jerusalem Talmud, but only in the Babylonian Talmud. The concept is the same somewhat, right? That it was transferred orally from court to court, but not necessarily that it was given over to Moses orally. We feel that the judges that were established in the Jewish Bible, particularly in Deuteronomy chapter 17, had the authority to establish not only case law, but to determine how ceremonial laws are to be kept in a uniform manner in biblical Israel. And that it would be quite impossible to keep ceremonial law, right, with everyone on the same page if there wasn't that thrust for consensus. And that's what the actual essence of the oral law is, the rulings of the court. This is reiterated by Maimonides in the 3rd chapter of Hilchos Mamrim, quite clear. It says, that it's the great court in Jerusalem that is the source of the oral law. Unlike what many have heard, let's say, Kabbalistically inclined rabbis give over countless times, that we believe in the oral law because it's a fundamental belief that it was given to Moses on Mount Sinai. No, that's what we call Midrashei Agadah, this folklore, this legend that in some way crept in to make it a pill that's easier to swallow. Go ahead. I heard someone trying to interject. I'm sorry. Okay, fine. The way we view the oral law, it's simply the rulings of the court. This court was established by Moses, sanctioned by God. God tells Moses in the book of Deuteronomy, first in the book of Numbers, to establish a court of 70 elders, 71 with himself. This court had many different names. They Beitin Hagadol, Shoftim, Zakanim, Anshe Knesset Gedolah, and eventually the Sanhedrin. It was the same court, sanctioned in the same Torah. That, again, does not exist nowadays. So any individual who tried to establish anything nowadays, right, at most could establish some sort of custom for their community, being that they would only have as much authority as their community gives them, but they can't speak for all of Israel like this court would speak for all of Israel in practical matters, not metaphysical matters. The reason I emphasize this is because I know what statements rub, let's say, Karaites or people who are Torah only the wrong way. The idea that a human being could speak in behalf of God instead of a human being or certain individuals trying to build consensus so the biblical nation could move forward in a uniform manner. That's what I'm trying to defend here. So the idea that we could keep the Torah, which about half the Torah is made up of ceremonial laws, by merely trying to decipher the words in that Torah on an individual basis, I believe it's quite absurd. It's quite destructive, right? And it's just really an attempt to disorganize religion. So I'm taking more of the middle of the road approach. It's not how the super mystics teach that the oral law in some cases is more important than the written law. I would never say that. However, in terms of consensus, in terms of moving forward in a uniform manner, it is quite impossible to keep ceremonial laws, Torah ceremonial laws, without the consensus put together by judges. And anything else brought forth by those judges is never called Torah law. It's properly called rabbinic law. The rabbis in the Talmud constantly went out of their way to make a distinction between Torah laws and rabbinic laws. I know when people who are in some way anti-Talmud try to represent the rabbis within the Talmud, they make it seem like these rabbis arrogantly constantly add to the word of God. We understand it appears twice in the Torah, don't add or take away. And the rabbis in the Talmud went out of their way, for the most part, to constantly make a distinction between a rabbinic law, which is a ruling that has nothing to do with the Torah law, a takana or a gezerah, right? Versus an actual Torah law or an interpretation to a Torah law, which is really where their authority lies as presented to them from the Torah itself. So that's my position that I would be defending tonight.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Asher. And Israel, to you, your opening statement, please.
Hey everybody, good to see you again. Well, I'd like to say that I wish that the Jewish people would let me be their spokesman. Unfortunately, they don't like me very much. But you see, the standpoint that I take is that the Talmud, though Rabbi Meza presents it as being having utility to the Jewish people, I'd like to argue that it's actually done more harm than good. And while it's true that in concept having judges is actually something that the Torah puts forward as a necessity. And it's important to have people that discuss the matters of the law, that discuss what it is that God wants from us. So that's undeniably important. However, when it comes down to the Talmud being the source that we look to as the actual place of authority for Judaism and what the Jews should be following, I'd like to argue that the Talmud is extremely lacking in that arena. First of all, Asher talks about the Talmud representing the high court in the temple. The problem is when you open the Talmud, it actually reads like a debate, a series of debates between individual rabbis. So it doesn't read anything like high court rulings. The Talmud is full of really awful statements. And, I hate to bring this up because it's like airing dirty laundry, but unfortunately it's a necessary thing to do because I can just read a few quotes to you from the Talmud. And these are not just like anti-Semite quotes from the internet. I am versed in Talmudic language. I've read this within the book itself, within the actual literature written in the Aramaic Hebrew of the Talmud. We have in the Talmud, these are all from the Babylonian Talmud, which is the more prominent Talmud. Eruvin 21b, be more careful with the words of the rabbis than with the words of the Torah, because if you go against the words of the rabbis, you're deserving of death. So immediately the rabbis are inserting themselves in a historical period, hundreds of years after this temple was destroyed. And Deuteronomy 17, which the rabbi here is mentioning, explicitly says that you need to go to the place that God chooses in order to receive the instruction of the judge and the Levitical priests that dwell and reside in that place. Key point, the place that God chooses. If we have a place that God chooses where there is a revealed priesthood and a revealed presence of God among the people, then we can rely on the rulings that come out of that court. But when we're talking about sloppily preserved rulings from a bunch of rabbis hundreds of years after the fact, claiming to perfectly preserve this, even though it's clearly within their interest to alter the rulings of the court, because the court actually consisted of Sadducees as well. In fact, many times it was majority Sadducees. And the Sadducees were people that disagreed with the rabbis. They were people that were more scripture Torah only. And so the Pharisees somehow walk away saying that the Sanhedrin, which is this Greek word for the court, was actually aligned with them. To me, that seems like revisionist history. But at the end of the day, we have to talk about the reality here. Okay, the reality of the world that we live in is not a unified Israel. Israel is a dispersed, exiled nation. There is no place that God chooses that is available. There is no active priesthood. All of the conditionals that the Torah speaks about to even grant authority to a king, the king has to be chosen by God. There is going to be a prophet like Moses. There ain't no one like that. There's going to be an active priesthood. There's going to be a place that God chooses. None of that exists. These are preconditions for the nation to be truly unified as Asher sees it as some futuristic event. What we have currently is a very small sliver of the Jewish people who are still Orthodox, who claim to be the consensus of the Jewish people, who, in my opinion, are misrepresenting what the Torah is actually about and what Israel is actually supposed to represent for the world. And so, again, I'm just going to give you a few more unfortunate quotes here. We have a quote from Yevamot 47b that says, converts to Judaism are like a thorn in Israel's side. And the Tosafot, which is one of the commentators on the page, says that's because their impure blood does not allow the divine presence to dwell among Israel. So this is clearly an idea of supremacy of Jewish blood, that converts are like a thorn in our side because they don't understand all the details of our commandments. They don't understand what it's like to be a Jew. And so their impure blood does not allow God's presence to dwell among us. They also say things like, when it comes to a priest marrying a woman, the Torah says that a priest cannot marry a woman who is a whore, who is a prostitute. And the rabbis say that all convert women, even convert women that are virgins, are considered whores, which, by the way, this goes against the Torah because the Torah says we're supposed to love the convert and glorify them and support them. Yet we're seeing they're a thorn in our side. The women are whores. And so this is really despicable. Now we also have this very strange idea. Like, again, we talk about law, like this is supposedly sophisticated law. If you want to know whether a girl is a virgin or not, Ketubot 10b, place her on a wine barrel. And if you can smell the wine coming through her breath, that means that she's not a virgin because she's open down there and the wine is coming through. Okay. This is like retarded. Sorry. It's ridiculous. It's gross. And this is considered like sophisticated. Oh, the great rabbis, how dare you not respect them? Right. We have more. We have a statement. If you ever want to see like some awful stuff, go to Sanhedrin 58b. It says a non-Jew can marry his sister and his daughter, and a slave can marry his mother. And again, I'm just going to read these quotes. They're really not, it's hard to hear. A non-Jew who has anal sex with another man's wife is not liable for adultery. So again, because he's not Jewish. A non-Jew who hits a Jew is deserving of death. If one slaps the cheek of a Jew, it's like slapping the cheek of the divine presence. This is all the same page, Sanhedrin 58b. And the final statement is that a non-Jew who keeps the Sabbath, so the Sabbath is the seventh day of the week, resting, is deserving of death. So if you rest on the seventh day, you're deserving of death. Now, actually, Rashi, who is the great commentator on the page, makes it clear that it's not just if they rest on the Sabbath that they're deserving of death, but if a non-Jew were to rest any day ever, they're deserving of death based off of a ridiculous misinterpretation. In the beginning of Genesis, after the flood, God says that day and night and the seasons will not cease. And so they say, well, it says that you cannot cease day and night. So non-Jews who are before the time of Moses, at the time of the flood, they can never cease. They can never rest ever. Right. So, I mean, again, this sounds a lot like, oh, the Goyim got to work, but, we get to have our 6-day made up rabbinic holidays. And it goes on. You may not drink the wine of a non-Jew. Avodah Zarah 29b. You may not have the milk, bread, and oil or cooking of a non-Jew. Avodah Zarah 35b. Right. And this is like, it's just terrible because you're claiming that this is law. You're claiming that this is sophisticated law. You're claiming that this is somehow like what we should be following as the Jewish people, when this stuff is clearly baseless. It is not based on the Torah at all. You say it's rabbinic law. It's not Torah law. Yet at the same time, what's the difference? It's like, it's a trick here. It's like, if I don't call it Torah law, you're just obligated to follow it under the Torah's commandments. And by the way, when people fulfill rabbinic commandments like hand washing and reading the book of Esther on Purim, among other rabbinic commandments, the blessing that they say is, blessed are you, God, who commanded us to do this. And the rabbi's explanation is, well, we are sanctioned by God to do whatever we want. So therefore, if we tell you to do something, it's like God is telling you to do it. So essentially, they place themselves in the seat of God, and they tell you that you have to do whatever we tell you to do. And I find that to be extremely destructive. I find that to be extremely wrong. And again, it pains me to have to bring this up. And I'm not saying that Jews actually believe this, but because Jews don't really believe this, why are you sitting here propping up the Talmud? This is the Mishnah, which is brought down in the Talmud in Nida 44b, says that a 3-year-old girl is ready to be married with sex. So you can marry a 3-year-old girl through intercourse. And the Talmud proceeds to have a debate whether it's 3 years old and 1 day or just 3 years old. So these are the kinds of conversations, and this is just the top of the surface here, of the kind of asinine, perverted, twisted things that you will see in the Talmud, which is allegedly a book about great rabbis and their sophisticated consensus and ruling that the Jewish people are supposed to be governed by. But again, we see things like in Brachot 62a, rabbis are following their rabbis into the bathroom and the bedroom in order to observe how their rabbis are pooping and having sex with their wives, to see, like, what does the Torah really say about these things? So again, that's what happens when you think you need consensus about all these nonsensical things. The reality is that God has given us a very clear book of law. And the Orthodox approach is that the Torah is unreadable without the oral Torah, the written Torah. But the problem is that the Bible is all over the world, and people can open up the Bible whenever they want, and they can read the Torah. It's the first 5 books of the Bible. And the laws are very clear. Sure, there are debates that we can have. Sure, some things may be doubtful. Sure, we may need prophecy actually to settle some of these debates, as we see in the Torah. When Moses himself had doubts, God was able to speak to us. But today we don't have that prophecy. Today, as it says in Deuteronomy chapter 31, God has concealed his face. So we don't have that access to God. We don't have that ability to communicate with God. We have to do our best as an exiled, dispersed people. And to pretend that we have this perfect system from the rabbis, when it's in reality, it's the furthest thing from perfect. It's actually perverted. We should not sit here pretending like we need to defend this. I believe Jews should outright reject the Talmud as an authority among the people. I think it's caused nothing but harm to the Jewish people. I think we need to actually just be clear. The Talmud is not the Torah. The Talmud is a bunch of subjective opinions of rabbis. That is not what we follow. We follow the Bible. We have the same Bible. The Torah is the commandments. Do not add or subtract to those commandments. Deuteronomy 4:2, Deuteronomy 13:1, or in the Christian Bible, it's the end of Deuteronomy chapter 12. And finally, I just want to close off with 2 Torah sources. First of all, when it comes to consensus, it says in the book of Exodus 23:2, you shall not follow the majority to do evil, and you should not respond over a dispute to turn after the majority to pervert. So when the majority is doing wrong, or if the majority is perverted, do not follow them. So the idea that just because there's a consensus of Orthodox rabbis that say something, that does not make it right. The Torah explicitly says there is truth beyond what the majority says. And finally, just to speak to what the purpose of Israel even is, we have a verse here in chapter 19 of Exodus 19:5 and 6. Now, if you surely listen to my voice and you guard my covenant, then you will be a treasured people from all the peoples, because the earth is mine, and you will be for me a kingship of priests and a holy nation. So if we keep the covenant of Yahweh and we follow his decrees, then we will be treasured, and our role is to be a nation of priests. If we are priests, that means we are ministering to someone outside of ourselves. Who are we ministering to? The rest of the nations. How can we minister to the rest of the nations if we follow the rabbi's path and approach of locking people out, of looking down on other human beings? I think it's completely immoral and unrighteous, and I wish that the Jews would understand that they have zero obligation to follow this. This is an invisible authority from 2,000 years ago that has been ruling over the Jewish people. It's caused the majority of Jews to leave the religion altogether, and the small percentage of Orthodox Jews who are dedicated to the religion are stuck with all this. I pray that we all return to the word of God in the 5 books of Moses.
Thank you so much, Israel. I appreciate your opening statement. As a kind reminder to the audience, both gentlemen do have channels, and those links are being dropped and available in the video description. Please be sure to go like, subscribe, and share, and send them your money. We like it when you send them money. Also, we will get through the debate. We will move into closing statements. We will read and respond to your kind super chats. And then, of course, we will open up the panel for open Q&A. So if you do have a question or comment to either of the gentlemen, we will be dropping that link into the live chat later on when we're ready, and we'll have you up and ready to go to ask. All right, gentlemen, I leave the floor open to you.
Okay. I'm going to try to respond to a few things he said. I think I wrote down every one of his points here. And it seems like his issue with the oral law had nothing to do with my presentation on what the oral law is. but on essentially how people misrepresent the idea of the oral law. For example, I mean, he quoted the statement that converts, it says they're kashim like a sapachat, like they're like a thorn on the side of Israel. That's not in the oral law. That's not in the Mishnah. That was stated in Babylon hundreds of years after the closing of the Mishnah. So we have to make a distinction between what's the actual oral law and people who, by the way, the rabbinical approach in the oral law is not that it's perfect, and it's not that it's sophisticated, but rather that it's necessary, by the simple fact that these rabbinical books are made up of debate. I mean, the notions are essentially ambiguous. They're trying to do a lot with a little. Why? So Israel could move forward in a uniform manner. As a matter of fact, the early detractors of this oral law or rabbinic Judaism had no issue with these statements. Their major issues, right, that first arose in the 9th century, because the Sadducees actually believed in the oral law, had to do with the mixing of milk and meat. Had nothing to do with what's the earliest age that a marriage could be consummated. Why? Because we have to judge people in the generation that they live.
Oh, let him finish.
Okay.
Let him finish.
Yeah, no, correct. Yeah. The first part I said was in the Babylonian Talmud. You know, this part, I understand that this portion in Nida is in the Mishnah, right? But that proves my point that their issue wasn't with what actually appeared in the Mishnah, but other issues. Why? Because we have to judge people in the generation that they live. The idea that we're going to determine what's sophisticated for them by today's standard, then everybody falls short, right? I mean, we could never look up to a Thomas Jefferson or George Washington because we're judging them by today's standards. We have to judge them in the times that they lived. And, you know, for compared to how people behaved in those generations, these rabbis were head and shoulders above them, and that means that they were good enough. Now, the idea that the Pharisees became the proponents of the oral law. First of all, nowhere in rabbinic literature, nowhere do any of our rabbis ever identify as a Pharisee. Nowhere in Talmudic literature, nowhere in the Mishnah, right? Nowhere like by the Rishonim. As a matter of fact, the Sadducees believed in the oral law itself because they helped develop the oral law. Like he said correctly, the Talmud describes Sadducees sitting on the Sanhedrin. And if the law comes from the Sanhedrin, that's what the oral law is. The issue that the Sadducees had was with their counterparts trying to establish law based off of folklore and legend, midrashe, agadah, versus in the Bible, whether it's the Torah or what later became known as the prophets and the writings. That was the major issue. And in terms of judging from the place that God will choose, well, we know that the Sanhedrin ruled from where? From the Lishkat HaGazit, from the room of hewn stones on the Temple Mount, the final place, at least physical structure, that God chose. So it wasn't too far-fetched. The oral law, I think the consensus, apart from all the fluff that has been attached to it, is the compilation that appears in the Mishnah, as terse as it reads. They've done a lot with a little because it's not a science. It's an attempt to keep Judaism alive in the exile. Now, there's some rulings that are set in stone in the Mishnah, but they're quite few. They're left up to debate. And then later in Babylon, specifically, did we see factions aligning with the house of Hillel versus the house of Shammai, saying that we rule like this with the exception of 18 verdicts, that we rule like that. None of that appears in the Mishnah. The understanding, right, that actually also appears in the Babylonian Talmud is Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim Chaim, that all the rulings that came from the Sanhedrin, it's equivalent as if they came from God. And this is a rendition that Maimonides gives over, like when he said that why is there a blessing when we read the Megillah, right? And we say that God commanded us. Maimonides acknowledges that the wording's a little off, so he says no, because the Torah itself does command us to listen to this court. It actually says that if you don't listen to the court, you're unalived, right? That by listening to this court, you're listening to God. Thank God for Maimonides for making that clarification, because I also had a problem with the wording, with the suppose 7 rabbinic mitzvot, which I mean I don't believe they're mitzvot, but they're rabbinic enactments. That means not from God, established by the Sanhedrin. Now, the reason it's important to hold some sort of consensus is because what are we doing in exile? We're waiting for the redemption. The idea that you can build some semblance of Judaism in the exile by everyone walking around with the Bible under their arm it's a bit absurd. There's some people who keep the Sabbath on Wednesday. There's some people who keep it on Thursday. How are we going to build consensus on ceremonial laws if we don't at least agree on the oldest recorded text on how ceremonial laws were kept in a uniform manner, which is the Mishnah? You don't have to believe it's divine. I don't believe it's divine. There's a notion, it's a bit satirical, known as halacha l'Moshe Sinai, that appears in the Mishnah. That doesn't mean that we believe that all these laws came from Moses. As a matter of fact, the Mishnah itself states that if there's a law that there is no debate in, and it's quite rare, Maimonides limits it, I believe, to 30 laws, then we could assume that it carries the weight as it was given to Moses. But there are thousands of laws. Okay, I think the average rabbi, at least back then, before the rise of Kabbalah, believed that these laws were man-made, not necessarily sophisticated or perfect, but necessary. And I think reasonable, rational people know that in life, things aren't between what's horrific and what's utopian, but between what's good and what's better. It's not about revolution, it's about evolution, making things better with little increments. And that's essentially like the initiative of holding on to this oral law, because it keeps us on the same page ceremonially. That's pretty much it. That's the crux of the matter. How can we move forward? And it's not by tossing out the baby with the bathwater, but really defining what is the oral law. And it's just the legal rulings, the conclusive legal rulings that appear in the Mishnah. And the Gemara, which is the other part of the Talmud, is the commentary to the Mishnah. So if he's going to quote mainly with the Gemara, by the way, right, that gets us in trouble all the time, to in some way show how not sophisticated like our legal system is, then he's building a straw man argument, because the Mishnah itself is what we consider the oral law, not the commentary. Now, for the sake of consensus, we bring all opinions. The reason the Gemara is important is because the rabbis in the Gemara brought down other texts known as brises, works that were outside the Mishnah, but were of the time of the Mishnah, to help understand or bring closure to some legal statements in the Mishnah, right? But that doesn't mean that because the average rabbi cannot articulate this in a sophisticated manner, that we should look at the Mishnah in some like primitive way, right? That we have to make a separation between what historicity says the Mishnah is and what the modern day rabbis, what art school says the Mishnah is. That's it.
Okay, and before you go, Israel, I do want to make it a point to allow, I didn't want to interrupt you, Asher, but I do want to be able to allow room for hitting point to point. So if you do make a claim, allowing Israel the room to combat that one point at a time and moving forward with that. But I didn't want to interrupt you on that note, but I do want to make sure we're having a little back and forth and not more along the lines of long-winded points. But yeah, go ahead, Israel.
Israel and I get along very well. We've had this discussion many times, and we're both quite cordial. And I love talking to him because he's reasonable.
I just want to make sure he has the room to hit pieces that you are saying, because that would be very important to me if I were debating. Go ahead, Israel, to you, sir.
Yeah, of course. So again, already Asher is presenting a position that's not mainstream in Orthodoxy, to say that the Talmud is not the oral law. So essentially, if I understand correctly, you're saying only the Mishnah is the oral law?
The conclusive portions of the Mishnah, i.e. the rulings of the Sanhedrin, is the oral law. Mind you, the Mishnah never uses that term oral law. The Jerusalem Talmud never uses the term. It was first used in Babylon, hundreds of years after the closing of the Mishnah. A better term is halacha, divrei sofrim, like the din, like the final ruling.
Okay, so you don't have a problem disputing Talmudic opinions then?
I have no problem throwing Talmudic opinions under the bus, like many rabbis do. Many rabbis have a common phrase that we don't hold by this medrash. So only because something appears, for example, you talked about converts in some way being seen as a thorn on the side, and you brought down Tosfos, which are the medieval rabbis, which is an institution that that one of the rabbis there said something negative, but there's another one of his counterparts, Tosfos, also says the opposite, that this means that converts are so special that they frustrate born Jews, but you left that out of that, like out of your rebuttal, right? Why? Because you wanted to lay down your point that the rabbinical is primitive without saying that everything is ambiguous. Anything outside of the Torah and the rabbinic rulings are essentially ambiguous.
I mean, it's quite a interesting way to say we love them so much they're like a thorn in our side. But I mean, again, the bottom line is that both these and those are the words of the living God. So the negative opinion would be also considered valid, right? So I mean, from a Orthodox perspective, we have to value.
No, that has to do with the Sanhedrin, not Tosfos.
Okay, so I get it. So again, you want to go all the way back to to the foundation of.
No, the rabbi you quoted is in the Gemara. It's not in the Mishnah.
I understand. It's in the Gemara and the Talmud, and then the Tosfos is the commentator. I'm just saying, like, generally speaking, when you say this is a thorn in my side, you mean it's like the bane of your existence. It's not. It doesn't have a positive connotation. So the positive. But it's not a statement
set forth by the Sanhedrin. It was a rabbi in Babylon.
I understand.
Or a teacher in Babylon.
I understand. So again, you're saying I'm not going to take responsibility for what the Talmud says, which is already good because you're already like a million steps ahead of your average Orthodox Jew who swallows the pill whole and thinks that the Zohar and basically every book that was written by a rabbi is the word of the living God. So we're already making progress, but essentially I quoted to you Mishnahs as well, like the Mishnah saying you can marry a 3-year-old with intercourse, like the Mishnah saying that you can't eat the cooking or the wine or the oil or the milk of a non-Jew, like the Mishnah saying in Gittin 90a that you can divorce your wife if she burned your food or if you found a prettier one. All of this sounds like very stupid, bad ideas that I don't know how we're supposed to consider this. So again, you're going to say that's also not the ruling of the High Court, if I understand.
I mentioned that the early detractors of the oral law had no issue with those rulings, meaning that we have to judge people in the generation that they lived. No one is saying, unlike you said, that we view the oral law or rabbinic literature of the time as sophisticated and perfect.
Do you not think that the Torah would teach us that non-consensual sex is bad? The Torah says in Deuteronomy that non-consensual sex is like murder. So why couldn't someone who read the Torah be able to gather that sleeping with a 3-year-old is bad?
I'm saying that the early detractors of the oral law had no issue with that statement. That statement is not encouraging people to have sex with children. It's trying to determine what's the legality. Okay, what's the earliest age that, for the sake of case law, we can establish a marriage?
How are you going to defend the indefensible?
Oh, well, it's easily defensible because throughout Jewish history,
legality of it,
you will not find one individual who ever married a child.
So why are they discussing the legality of it? Like maybe they should just not talk about that. It's another option.
Well, I mean, if it's their job to determine who's married and who's not, an age has to be put forth.
So why'd you say that no one was doing that if that wasn't the way that they were behaving? You're saying because that was the time they were in. That was the time they were in. That was the way it was, and they needed to discuss this for case law. But now you're also saying that they never did that. So did they do it or not? Because if
one has nothing to do with the other, like my friend.
So it's just theoreticals. Like, let's show up at school today and talk about the theoretical of betrothing a woman, a 3-year-old girl with intercourse.
Something has to be written down about it. Okay.
Why?
So what? Okay. So if it's not there, it would have to be developed.
Why?
Now, even early Christianity had no issue with that initial statement. We don't see Jesus in some way, like speaking of the pandemic of his time of rabbis marrying children. It's because it never happened. It never happened. It didn't happen. It's brought down, right, as a theoretical. What's the earliest age that someone could be in some way liable for any infraction, right, as a married person?
Do you agree that a 3-year-old is liable for marriage? I don't agree with that.
Even
from a legal, even from
it has nothing to do with me agreeing. That's what it says. We
somehow got here to the theoretical legalistic case of marrying a 3-year-old with intercourse. I don't even agree with their theoretical. I don't think a 3-year-old is capable of getting married. I think that's insane.
It's not saying that in some way that's encouraged or that was done at its time, but they had to conclude what equals marriage. And there is an opinion in rabbinic literature that the earliest marriage that appears in the Torah was with the 3-year-old. Okay.
You mean the false fake calculation of Isaac and Rebecca?
Wait. Yeah, but why is it fake? Right?
Why is it fake? Because the Torah never says that Rebecca was 3 years old.
I understand. I'm telling you the root of the 3 years old.
So it's a false premise.
It's a notion. Okay, only because you disagree with something. Like, I don't agree with it. You know, so I'll say that that's how Rashi understood it. The Ibn Ezra disagreed, right? I mean, I believe the consensus is
The
actually
Torah
12
never says that.
Hold on, let him finish. Let him finish, Israel.
The consensus amongst the rabbis is that she was around 14 years old. Okay, there's an opinion that Rashi reiterates that's 3. Now, as you know, the Mishnah is a book of many different opinions, and this is just one opinion put forth. You know that in Jewish history, there hasn't been a Jewish leader ever married to a prepubescent child, right? Only because someone puts forth this opinion, it's not correct for you to in some way disqualify this book that never claims to be divinely inspired, okay, as completely useless, right? I mean, just because there's something that you happen to disagree with. There are statements in the Mishnah that I disagree with, okay? But that doesn't mean that I'm going to make an attempt to understand legal rulings the way I see fit. It's not up to me to determine how we establish a new month or who gets unalived for breaking the Sabbath. There has to be some consensus, and that consensus was put forth by the elected leaders of Israel at the time. That's it. You know, whether wrong or right, it was necessary. And it doesn't claim to be sophisticated nor primitive, right? But I don't see the Karaites, which didn't exist at the time, because truth be told, there wasn't a movement that went against the rulings of the Sanhedrin till the rise of the Karaite movement in the 9th century. Now, there's people who made an attempt to establish their own rulings, like those who lived in the areas like of Qumran, like some say like they're the Essenes, you know, some say they're not, you know, so I mean, I'm not going to assume that it's necessarily the Essenes, but the notion that people thought that you could in some way establish ceremonial law the way you saw fit by self-interpretation, that is something built out of affluence and boredom. I mean, it's equivalent to people in the U.S. today thinking they know better than the founding fathers.
You're saying the rabbis were affluent and bored? That sounds accurate.
No, today. I'm speaking about you, my friend.
So if I try to read the Torah for myself, that means that I have like negative character. Let me ask you a question.
No, not at all. Wait, I mean, I didn't say that at all. Okay,
I mean, I
never said about negative character.
You're saying that reading
the Torah, affluence and boredom, that you think because we're standing on the shoulders of giants, essentially, they brought us this far, that you think that you could have come up with more sophisticated, right? A more sophisticated consensus for Israel if people would in some way just listen to your interpretation of what you think the Torah says.
Okay, they brought us this far, as in 2,000 years into exile, so that's not very far in a good sense.
And how to keep ceremonial law. I'm not saying.
And again, you know, you talk about the importance of having consensus for, let's say, a death penalty issue. Two things. First of all, when was the last time the rabbis put anyone to death for breaking Shabbat?
Well, that's a midrash, by the way, and like in the same page, it contradicts it. It says,
No. I'm saying how, like, when was the last time the rabbis put someone to death for breaking Shabbat?
Oh well, I mean, the rabbis cease exercising the capital punishment once they moved from the room with hewn stones. Once they moved from the
for the 2,000 years that they've been maintaining the oral law, they've had zero power or control to even implement this. And within the oral law itself, Rabbi Akiva says, I think we should never give the death penalty ever. And another rabbi says, you shouldn't give the death penalty once in 70 years. That's a Mishnah. So essentially, the need for consensus here doesn't really seem to be very relevant. And again, at the end of the day, no, these people, just because they were rich, affluent people 2,000 years ago writing down their very bad opinions, doesn't mean me and you should be barred. I'm not saying listen to me. I'm saying all of us should not be barred from this conversation that they left off 2,000 years ago, where clearly we can actually do a better job having the conversation than them, because we don't even have to talk about the theoretical of a 3-year-old, and we don't have to make up a bunch of made up laws and then claim that it's the word of God. Why are we not allowed to have this conversation ourselves? And again, you know, you're claiming it's the Sanhedrin. You're claiming that it's the temple court. At the same time, first of all, the Pharisees, you say they're not called Pharisees. The rabbis of the Mishnah and the Talmud hated the Sadducees. So it's hard to say that they were Sadducees.
And the Pharisees.
Okay, let's say they hate the Pharisees too. They speak against the Sadducees all the time, and the Essenes, obviously. So, you know, ultimately, it's a certain group of rabbis who've maintained control over the Jewish people, and we're supposed to say that because they maintain power, therefore they're right?
No. The rabbis today are not in any way connected to the individuals that appear in the Mishnah. Anyone with the title rabbi today picked it up in a line established in Svat in 1536. Okay, so you're talking about a movement around 500 years old. It's ceremonial. It was created by the Mari Rav. The notion of a rabbi meant that you had smicha, ordination, going back to Moses. Okay, that's the idea. So like you said correctly, rabbis today don't have the power to unalive anyone because you need proper authority to do so. Now, to quote Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Meir, who existed at a time when the Sanhedrin ceased unaliving people for over 100 years, right? They're not a good representation of what actually happened in the Sanhedrin, but to assume that when the Torah says to unalive someone, that those who are more sophisticated in our society say like, well, that we determine that, not the court, it's a bit absurd. There has to be a consensus on how, Torah laws to be kept in order for things to be fair. The idea that I think you're doing something right, but my neighbor thinks you're not, right? And then that I try to save you while he tries to unalive you. Israel can't move forward in such a manner. So, yes, the cutoff point is when the Sanhedrin had authority. That's my cutoff point. That's when Maimonides says. That's what the Mishnah says. You can't lump me in with rabbis today who think that some rabbi in Bnei Brak has the same authority, as Hillel, let's say. Huge distinction. And I understand your position. I've spoken to many Karaites, and I know that you don't identify as a Karaite, but the sentiment is the same, who feel like, if for some reason they were presented this rendition of the oral law, perhaps they wouldn't have become Karaites, because it's so reasonable to assume that consensus is necessary. It's so necessary that the Karaites themselves created their own book of tradition called the Sefer HaYerusha. They have a book of that I would call equivalent to the oral law to help explain ceremonial law so Israel can move forward. But I think that my friend Israel has gone far beyond and said, no, we're the ones who determine ceremonial law on an individual level. And that's very convenient, again, because of affluence and boredom in the US. But when we properly get redeemed back into Israel, how can Israel ever move forward if I'm debating, right, from a supposed authoritative perspective, that this is how the Sabbath should be kept and that's how the violators should be, punished, and Israel is debating from that perspective? We would never move forward. There has to be consensus.
I have an idea. Idea. Deuteronomy 18, God will make a prophet like Moses.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll know from God. But right now,
Deuteronomy chapter 18 is the only chapter in the whole Torah that sanctions the role of prophets in general, not one prophet. And their job is to bring you back to the Torah when you begin to stray from the Torah. And yes, that we believe that the prophets also had this authority to judge.
Well, I mean, again, it says whatever he says to you, listen, because the same way Moses was called a prophet too, and Moses was a prophet and a judge, and Moses told the people what God said. So, I mean, again, if we had really if we had debates that we could not resolve, then we would have to go to God, and that's why the prophecy is necessary. That's why the place that God chooses is necessary.
100%.
But again,
I agree. I agree fully with what you said.
Okay, so I'm saying, so then that's your answer. Like right now, we're in a time of exile. We're in a time where we do not have actual consensus. You want to talk about, there's the 39 melachas.
I agree. Today, rabbis have no authority. Rabbis have no authority today.
Even the Mishnah rabbis, rabbis of the Mishnah.
The Mishnah is there for consensus. It's just there for consensus.
I wanted to let Israel finish if he wanted to.
I was saying that even within the Mishnah, you're dealing with endless debates between individual rabbis the same way you're doing that in the Talmud. Hard to say how you see that as actual clear consensus of rabbis, but let's say they have a consensus about the 39 melachot. Would you say that's a consensus issue?
I never said clear. Again, that you're using words like clear, sophisticated, perfect.
So then,
because you're building a straw man argument.
Hold on, Israel. You want to let him answer you?
Okay, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. No, I'm just responding that he keeps on building the straw man argument. Clear, sophisticated, perfect. I never use these terms to describe the oral law. Necessary. Now, it's to in some way lump in the rabbis today with rabbis who we believe in faith had ordination going back to Moses. Rabbis today don't claim to have this ordination going back to Moses. However, historicity, right, solidifies the idea that there was a Sanhedrin, even the New Testament, that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, the head of the Sanhedrin, even before rabbinic literature appeared, a book that's a lot more popular than the Mishnah nowadays, is validating the seat of authority back then, and that was the Sanhedrin. I think it's safer for us, to go by the consensus that they established than to rely 2,000 years later to what Israel thinks ceremonial law should mean from a practical perspective.
Well, first of all, I'm not telling people to follow me. I'm telling people to follow the Torah, and I'm perfectly willing to follow the Torah's command to discuss these words day and night, which is what Joshua even says, discuss the words of the Torah of Moses day and night. I'm just saying that this so-called consensus you're admitting yourself is unclear and subjective and really unreliable. So I'm asking you, is
But
the
necessary.
30, okay. Yes, let's say consensus is necessary when we have a unified nation. But we also agree that we can have that consensus through divine revelation, which would probably be necessary because we're at each other's throats with disagreements. But let's just say, again, we need to come to an understanding. When does Shabbat begin? What is considered work on Shabbat? Right. So would you say that the 39 melachot, the 39 work principles that the rabbis derive arbitrarily, by the way, from the actions of the building of the tabernacle, would you say that's a consensus issue from the Sanhedrin?
Well, the 39
I'm just trying
is
to find,
consensus.
I'm sorry to interject. Can you give me an example of something that you believe is a perfectly preserved court ruling that is necessary and effective and helps us to today?
Well, I mean, there's consensus on the 39 malachas. How we came to the 39 malachas, there's a debate on. With the notion that it was established of things that we did when we were building or that we didn't do when we were building the Mishkan is just one opinion. And there's many others that still conclude with the 39 malachas. Okay, regardless whether it's perfect or not, it's necessary so we can keep the Sabbath like in some reasonable, like familiar manner. Again, I'm not saying it's perfect.
But even within that, there is debate. So let's say one of the malachas is one of the work principles you cannot squeeze, right? And then they have a debate though, can you squeeze a lemon onto your salad, right? And so then they say, well, you can only squeeze the lemon if it's onto a solid object. And this is like supposedly like clear. Right, so or not?
Well, it's not clear.
Okay,
you're quoting the Gemara. You're not quoting the Mishnah. Let's make a distinction between the commentary and there's room. We had Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai. There was a time of the Zugot, right?
Saying even
pairs of judges that had different conclusions, but they understood that the source of the debate was necessary. That's the Mishnah. We can debate on how to live it out, and the notions could be ambiguous, but the thrust forward is still there. The attempt that everyone on his or her mountain is going to determine how we keep ceremonial law. That's when it becomes destructive.
Okay, but even within the consensus, there is debate, right? By definition, making the consensus not uniform. And furthermore, consensus does not dictate truth, as we discussed Exodus 23:2, which means that we have the ability to dispute that consensus, right? So
I never said it was truth. Again, you're using words like truth, perfect, sophisticated. I said it's necessary. By truth, I think you mean divinely inspired and perfect.
So let's say we need to let's phrase it this way. We need to change the consensus. We need to question the consensus. Like that's my position where I'm coming from. I'm not saying
and the rulings of the Sanhedrin could change.
Okay, so
we can't change it. I mean, only the court can change it.
Says the consensus.
Correct.
Right? Because the Torah doesn't say that. The Torah doesn't say that you cannot. First of all, the Torah doesn't speak of the Sanhedrin. You brought up Numbers 21 or Numbers 11. That's not a Sanhedrin case. That's a story of Moses saying the weight of the Israelites are too heavy on me, and God places the Spirit on him on 70 elders. That has nothing to do with a court in the temple. That's a arbitrary rabbinic.
So it's true that the word Sanhedrin is not there, but it's reiterated all through Tanakh. The court, the notion of the court, Zakanim, Shoftim, judges. There's a whole book in our Bible called Judges. So what judges?
Okay. I just want to
how can you have a judge without a court?
Okay, I just want to point out that it's not a Sanhedrin, but yes, there is a judge, there is a court, there are Levitical priests adjudicating law.
Same thing.
That's very clear. Well, it's not the same thing because the 71 model that's governed by consensus is a rabbinic idea because they have 71, therefore they govern based off of majority rule.
That's on Torah. It's 71 plus Moses. It's 70 plus Moses.
Yes, exactly. And the reason why they have that model is so that they can have a govern law by consensus and always have an odd number, right?
Okay. I mean, it's a very very convenient conclusion, but like, how can you contradict that it's in some way a fabrication?
Well, I'm saying that the idea that the court in the temple is supposed to be 70 elders is not a Torah idea. In fact, in the Torah, it says judge in the singular and the Levitical priests. So there's no mention of 70 or 71. So that's a rabbinic fabrication. But let's just say
wait, hold on. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, so you're saying that in the Jewish Bible,
in the
like
Torah,
regarding this court, it never mentions judges in plural?
It says you should have judges in your gates, but it says specifically the judge in the temple is judge singular. and Levitical priests. So that would
right. It says
be
Levium, first of all, here, which is plural, right? The priest and the judge of those days. But if you go to 2 Chronicles 19, that reiterates the same thing. It says judges.
Okay, I trust the Torah over Chronicles.
No, okay. I use Chronicles as a historical narrative to describe the life and times of what's going on there. And I'm pretty sure like you view it from the same perspective.
But that's convenient because Chronicles is confirming the rabbinic perspective, whereas the Torah is not.
Oh, this is historical. Here, look, it says...
I don't care about the history. I care about the law.
Like 2 Chronicles chapter 19, verse 5. He appointed judges in the land, in each of the fortified cities of Judah. He told them, consider what you do because you're not judging for mere mortals, but for God. But this is Jehoshaphat when he reestablished the court. He said, he appointed some of the Levites, priests, and heads of the Israelites' families to administer the law of the Lord and settle disputes. Okay, this is a reiteration. This is Jewish history or Israelite history.
I don't care about history. I care about the law. And again, I'm not saying there aren't judges, plural, in the cities. That's a shoftim v'shotrim, right? Plural judges and law enforcement. But specifically, the high court in Deuteronomy 17 that you're discussing refers to judge in the singular. I'm just pointing that out.
What judge existed in the singular in the place that God chose?
Samuel.
In the time
Samuel was a judge and a prophet, and he operated out of the temple. He was raised in the temple.
So you're saying
tabernacle. Yeah.
That when it says the judge of those days, it's talking about an individual. That from that perspective,
it is a singular word.
No, I get it, but it's reiterated in the plural later on in Deuteronomy 18, the next chapter, when it says, "I will raise up for you a prophet," and then it says, "And the prophet that speaks what I don't command," and meaning that even their prophet, right, is understood in the plural.
Okay, again, like it says the judge who is in that day, but it does use the singular word. I'm just pointing that out.
Oh, right, okay.
But again,
you don't believe there was one judge only.
I don't believe there was 70 judges, is what I'm saying. Or if there was, I don't believe that that's aligned with the Torah.
You do agree that there were 70. Wait, first of all, why do you think that they would judge in the place that God will choose? Why? Because the 70 elders judged where? In the front of the tent of meeting. The tent of meeting was the place that God chose, and that got translated into the Lishkat HaGazit, the room of hewn stones, on top of the Temple Mount.
Again, you're the extrapolation from Numbers 11 that the 70 elders was not a matter of judgment; it was a matter of spirit. That's the story. The story is the spirit was too heavy on Moses, so God took the spirit and put it on 70 elders.
You're thinking of the story of Jethro, like the princes. That's different than Deuteronomy chapter 17, right? That with the whole decision of the man carrying sticks, that they couldn't conclude what was the final verdict, so God had to, in some way beseech God. We understood that the reason they judge from the place that God chooses is because they're seeking the guidance of God, even though their rulings are man-made. I think it's a sophisticated idea, not that other rulings are sophisticated, that God expects us to follow fallible men because it's necessary, but the notion, right, that they're sanctioned to judge comes from the Torah. Only because you're sanctioned to judge doesn't mean that all your rulings are infallible. And that's what people do not understand, that for the sake of unity, for the sake of progress, okay, we look for consensus. And there's this spirit that exists, I think, in almost every religion that's there to disorganize a religion, saying that I could do it better, right? To in some way defang the whole legal system, trying to in some way do the right thing, but they end up leaving a trail of blood and carnage. This utopian approach of reimagining the legal system when historicity in Judaism has always pointed the opposite, right? Always pointed to our leaders. I'm not saying today, I agree, the rabbis today have no authority, okay? But to say that even the rabbis who existed 100 years after the destruction of the temple, right, they fabricated it out of nowhere, that's the leap.
Okay, I mean, I think there's good grounds for that, but I do see someone saying in the comments, because what I said, I don't care about history, I care about the law. And you're like, oh, you just sound like a lawyer. Well, I just want to clarify what I mean. The law is the law of God in the 5 books of Moses. And I'm saying, I don't care what the Jews did historically. That doesn't dictate truth. What Asher is saying is, look, we have historical evidence of how the Jews behaved and what their consensuses were, and therefore we're going to follow that. And I'm saying, I want to follow what is written in the book of the law that is actually transmitted from God to Moses in direct communication, stated, do not add or subtract. And if you want to know how to follow God, follow what is written in the book of this Torah. That's explicit, Deuteronomy 28:58, Deuteronomy 30:10. follow what is written in this book of the Torah. So explicitly, we're being called back to the written word as the basis for our connection and relationship to God and understanding of the law. Now,
so let's put this to the test. Hold on. Let's really put this to the test. And this is an example that I brought forth many times. I mean, I've spoken to Israel many times. I love Israel. He's like very cordial and calm. And it's quite impressive for a Jewish person to be so self-controlled. But, you know, nowhere in the Torah does it tell us how to specifically establish months. Above all my Sabbaths you shall keep. How do you keep the Sabbath? How do you keep what's called a Shabbaton? Like basically every feast day. Because it says you shall sanctify the months, right? So the understanding is that the court, the ruling body, had to establish on how you establish a month in order to determine when is the first month, like the second month, the seventh month. There's no way by following the Torah alone. So from that perspective, you'll go with what the judges concluded. You know, but for everything else, you're going to reinvent the wheel.
So I'll just point out that the Torah never explicitly says which calendar to follow. It just says to follow a calendar that's aligned with the seasons, where Passover falls out in the beginning of the spring equinox. And it also says to use the luminaries in the skies to dictate the days, years, months, and festivals.
So how do you do it?
So
where's the consensus on how to do it? The only consensus exists amongst the judges.
Well, no, I mean, I'm responding to you that you can come to various different conclusions in my research. And over the years, I've actually heard of multiple different viable calendars. Some are solar, some are lunar, some are lunisolar, which is a mix of moon and sun. The Torah does not give specific instruction on that, which means it's not a law. It is actually, and this I will agree with you, it is a matter of practicality and what works best and what's most closely aligned with the truth of the seasons and the luminaries.
How do you keep it?
I personally follow the rabbinic calendar because I think
because it's
works.
necessary, correct?
No,
see, there's
because
a distinction with appreciating something without deifying it.
I know. I appreciate the preservation of the rabbinic calendar. It's quite good, but I know people that follow different calendars, and I don't think that they are less righteous than me because they follow different calendars. Because ultimately, they are making the best attempt at a calculation, and they're following the laws based off of that. Now, again,
they're making an attempt to disorganize religion. That's what they're doing. They're keeping the Sabbath on Wednesday. There's a movement called the Lunar Sabbath Movement. I'm sure you're familiar with it. They're keeping Yom Kippur on a different day, Rosh Hashanah
I don't have an attachment to things being so organized. The things about organization.
Clearly not.
Well, I'll tell you, clearly not, because the things that I care about organization is marriage is between a man and a woman. People have children. Societies don't murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not lie, do not cheat. Those are the things that need uniformity. When it comes to ceremonial law, I don't even think consensus is that important, really only in the context of the nation of Israel being a unified people. So the only time I'd agree with you that we need to have a unified way of, we start the Sabbath on Saturday morning or on Friday night.
I think you're making my case then. So in ceremonial issues, things that, let's say,
I don't think it matters.
I mean, from a prophetical perspective, God, that when he calls out Israel for their bad behavior, it's typically for moral issues, mistreating the almana, the yatim, the ger, right? The widow, the orphan, the stranger. I mean, it's rare that he calls them out for keeping Yom Kippur on a different day. It's necessary to be kept. We'll tolerate rabbinic rulings for the sake of consensus, right? I understand that there's weightier matters to the Torah, right? Like the ethical laws. But however, from God's perspective, he makes no distinction in the Torah between ceremonial laws and ethical laws. In the prophets, he does. You know, so we should make some attempt to keep ceremonial law in a unified manner with some level of consensus, like acknowledging that it's man-made, just so we can agree and move forward, and then focus on the more important portions of the Torah, that what we call mitzvot, the mitzvot ben adam lechavero. You know,
this is so weird. This is so weird because I don't have a problem coexisting with people who keep the Sabbath on a different day than me, who keep the holidays on a different day than me, who tie their tzitzit in a different way than me, who whether they interpret tefillin as a literal box or whether they interpret it as a metaphor. I don't have a problem coexisting with them. I don't have a different foundation. You know, in order to coexist with other people, you need to have a common values and foundation. You don't need to have an identical way of observing. Like, I can give you a personal example. I keep Shabbat on Saturday morning, and a close family friend of mine keeps Shabbat on Friday night. I will still go to their house on Friday night for the meal, and we'll have a very nice time. And then I'll leave and drive away in a car and still cook my meal Friday night and then start Shabbat Saturday morning. we're not at each other's throats. The disorganization that you fear so much, I think it's like an overemphasis on uniformity, when in reality, that's not even what matters. The only time this uniformity would matter is when there is a genuine death penalty at play, when there is a genuine thing to worry about, in which case we would need to have a unified way to adjudicate these matters. But in this time where Israel is scattered in exile, your opinion is just about as good as mine. And we are authorized by God to actually do our best at understanding. I don't think that just giving away your ability to have judgment to rabbis that lived 2,000 years ago is in any way humble or wise, especially when the rabbis over and over again prove to be lacking in their interpretations. And when you bring scripture against them, when you bring logic against them, when you bring basic common sense against them, it doesn't stand up. Why would I follow that system? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, so your example of a big sense of community is basically having Shabbat dinner in your friend's house. It does affect your interactions with the rest of the world. The whole notion of a synagogue, a Beit Knesset, is a house of gathering, right? Built off of rituals and ceremony that, like a handful of the ceremonies, have their root in the Mishnah.
Is a synagogue in the Torah?
No, I get it. It's not in the Torah, but the idea that it doesn't affect how you relate to the average Jewish person that may keep Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah on a different day, you worship at a different time. Their children won't marry. I mean, your children, because there isn't that sense.
That's their choice. I don't choose that.
You know why? Because it's hard for you to package what you believe and hand it over to your kids, because I'm pretty sure you're going to take the same approach with your kids and not act like a religious dictator. And you're going to tell them, I want you to interpret the Torah for yourselves, which means that any other religious person would never try to marry them because they want their line to continue. If every generation defines what Judaism is for themselves, then Israel cannot move forward as a nation, even though what's the glue holding it together is not in the Torah and it's not in the Mishnah, which is the book of the things we do in the rabbinical world are not in the Mishnah, but they're there to hold us together. And the root of that glue is the Mishnah. But you're saying, no, I rather reinvent the wheel ethically every generation, right? And still hope.
Reinvent. I'd rather reevaluate these ceremonial laws and these discussions surrounding the Torah and the truth of the law than just keep it locked in a point of history 2,000 years ago, because that's what they said 2,000 years ago, especially when, like, take even the Deuteronomy 17 court, even if you assume that they are the Deuteronomy 17 court, which again, they're not, because they're not in the place that God chooses. But even if you believe that this is a perfect preservation of the place that God chooses, what does it say?
Hillel was in the place that God chose. Ezra was in the place that God. And the Anshe Knesset Gedolah, the men of the Great Assembly, ruled from the place that God chose.
Okay, so let's just say that everything was according to the law and God's presence truly was there, and these people were really ruling in accordance with God and his will, and the records of their rulings are properly preserved in the Mishnah, so there's a lot of ifs here, but let's just follow that all the way to its conclusion that you just stated. It says, the man who shall act maliciously, Bizadon, with the willful intention to do the wrong thing, to go against this court, is the man who is considered to be in contempt of court and to be against God. However, what I'm telling you here is I'm not acting maliciously. I'm acting in a genuine sense to counter the opinions of these rabbis, because I don't think they're right. I don't think that what they're saying adds up with scripture. I don't think that just because they said it 2,000 years ago,
if you're not offering an alternative, that's the problem.
Yeah, of course I'm offering an alternative. The alternative,
like if this statement in the Mishnah didn't exist, we'd have to invent it for the sake of unity. And you're saying they're wrong, but you're not going to tell us, like what totafot benenecha means. You're not going to tell us what you can and cannot do from an authoritative perspective on the Sabbath. You're just going to say they're wrong. So for the sake of ceremony and consensus, let's agree on something. Let's agree that this is at least useful and necessary, right? And move on to focus on the more ethical portions. But we're never going to move on to the more ethical portions because you're constantly poo-pooing anything that's rabbinical.
Again, I don't think that the ethical portions matter that much. That's why I think. Sorry, I don't think that the ceremonial aspects matter that much. That's why it's more on point for us to just follow on the basis of our best understanding.
To God, it matters.
Yeah, it does.
God, called the ceremonial. If you break the ceremonial, God views it as a toeva, as an abomination. It doesn't make sense to me. It makes sense to God.
1 second. I'm just curious. Where do you see that?
Eating pork is called a toeva. Eating pork is a ceremonial infraction.
Okay, but we all know what pork is, right? Are we now having a debate on what pork
I get it. Okay, kares, for eating, chametz on Pesach. I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah, don't eat leavened bread.
No. You're saying that we shouldn't focus on the ceremonial and worry only about, or focus on the moral. And I'm saying that God views the ceremonial very important.
Yes, it is very important, but at the same time, it's not important that we follow the consensus of the rabbis of the Mishnah.
I
That's
see.
not the
You have an issue with them. You know, it seems that like you're a wounded theist from this perspective. I'm not deifying them like the people who mistreated you deified them. I'm against the same people you're against.
Who mistreated me?
Well, I mean, it seems like your whole position is a reaction, everyone. You know, that really doesn't affect like my position, because I'm not deifying the rabbis. However, I wonder what Judaism would look if we didn't have their guidance, at least on ceremonial issues. But you're like, toss that out also. Let's reinvent the wheel. And you think...
I didn't say to toss it out. I just said to actually question it and put it to the test and not just accept it, because lots of it is untrue and debatable. So,
okay, give me an example of something that you would put to the test that you'd come up with a different conclusion.
So again, the Mishnah Gittin 90a, you can divorce your wife if she burned your food. Okay. I put that to the test. I'd say the Torah says if you find in her ervat davar, the term erva refers to nakedness, to something's being exposed.
Yeah, they never said that's the only reason why you could divorce her. That's a reason.
Well, it says she does not find favor in your eyes.
Yes, that's not the only reason. That's a reason.
A matter of immorality.
Okay, so that's a reason. It said that if a man wants to divorce his wife, he just has to give her a certificate of divorce. The rabbis made a thrust forward debating, you know, here, by the way, one opinion was that you could only debate her, right, if like she was unfaithful, which is what Shammai said, and Hillel said, if she burned your food. So they're making an attempt to understand it. There's ambiguity in their arguments, 100%, but the attempt is still being made.
Okay. Israel, did you want to finish your point? I saw that.
Totally. The attempt is being made to have the conversation, and I'd like to be allowed to have the conversation as well. And all you can tell me is, oh, I'm a wounded theist or something. I don't know, whatever that was, diagnosis there. But apparently, like, this is a psychological issue for me, and I'm hurt or whatever. But that's not the case. The truth is,
it seems like it.
It seems like it. Okay. I don't know what your basis for that is, other than the fact that I'm genuinely trying to understand the scripture.
Well, because you're doing the same thing that they did in the Mishnah, but for some reason they're not allowed to do it, but you are.
I didn't say they're not allowed to do it. I'm saying that they are not the ultimate authority that we have to listen to.
They're the most influential authority by the simple fact that the vast majority of Jews
follow influential people.
No. The vast majority of Jews, right, like it or not, whether it's Reform or Hasidic, they all keep the Sabbath the same. Most of them keep the Sabbath the same day. They like most of them keep Yom Kippur the same day, right? The Karaite Jews, lunar Sabbath Jews aside. Okay, mainstream Jews rely on their opinions. Even the Reform movement, who is more adamant, like for their dislike of the Mishnaic rabbis than you are, okay, still keep ceremonial law as put forth, at least with the motifs that appear in the Mishnah. But you're not even like willing to give them that much.
So therefore, it's right. I don't see your argument.
No, I'm not saying the word right, true, perfect, like flawless, sophisticated. You're using those terms. Again, I'm saying necessary.
I would much rather find unity with my fellow human beings, Israelites included, by finding common ground on ethical matters, common ground even on these ritual laws and how we do them. We can have conversations, we can have disagreements, and we can have different interpretations. And when God actually reveals himself to us and says, you're wrong and he's right, then anyone who has a shred of sense in him will bow to God and do what God says to do. But in the meantime, it's a he said situation here. It's his word versus mine. And I don't see why you think that we should take the rabbis with the authority, with the unquestionable authority, or with the, whatever they say we got to do because it's the consensus, because this is what the Jews do. I disagree. I think that it's very sad that the Jews could only find common ground if we're doing the same, if we're going to synagogue on the same day, or if we're, wearing our kippah in the same place on our head. Like, this stuff is stupid. I don't actually
think... We're both Western Jews, right? Like, we live in the US, I'm in the East Coast, you're in the West. I think that morally and ethically, you and I probably agree on 99% of issues. Okay. And I'm an Orthodox Jew and you're a Torah only Jew. Where's this big discrepancy between Orthodoxy, like in your position, regarding moral laws?
Let's say my child, you would consider him not to be a Jew, right?
Your child? Why?
Mm-hmm. because his mother's not Jewish, you would consider my wife not to be welcome in Israel because she didn't go through a rabbinic.
Is that a
conversion
moral
process?
issue or a
Of course, it's a
ceremonial?
moral issue.
Why?
Acceptance of people as part of your nation. The Torah repeats itself over and
No,
over
regarding
again.
legality.
The Torah.
Yeah, but that doesn't
repeats
mean that I'm going to
the-
mistreat you because you happen to not be legally Jewish.
Well, I mean, excommunicating people from your community is mistreatment.
Well, we don't excommunicate people who are, I mean, first you have to be Jewish to be excommunicated. Okay. Like only because you happen not to have the status of a Jew, which technically just means that you're liable when there's a Sanhedrin for, let's say, breaking the Sabbath, right? Doesn't mean that you get mistreated.
Well, I mean, we
right?
just read the Talmud said a non-Jew who keeps the Sabbath is deserving of death.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's mistreatment. Again,
No,
saying that, you marry a goy. So
I
now,
asked you, between me as an Orthodox Jew and you as a Torah Jew, where do we differ morally? There isn't a rabbi nowadays that'll tell you that Gentiles have to be unalived for keeping the Sabbath or studying Torah.
That's because they don't have any power.
Again, you think
do
if the
you- how do you-
rabbis had the power, would they be unaliving Gentiles for studying the Torah?
Who knows? Why did they say it? If they
Well,
don't believe
it's because that's not what they meant. I mean,
Mm.
Maimonides explains what they meant, that the prohibition is them in some way creating a religion for themselves, right? This is why the rabbis actively used to proselytize. We want people to study Torah. What we don't want them to do is to hijack our Torah and in some way drag God's name through the mud. All right. And granted, I'm not a fan of that statement. And there's many more statements that I'm not a fan of in rabbinic literature. But however, to reinvent the wheel ceremonially, that's something that I view as disastrous.
I don't see what's so disastrous about it. Again, like we can still be cordial to each other. And by the way, you talk about the Jews being so aligned on like when Yom Kippur is, but how about the Jewish people's misalignment on matters of morality, like leftist Jews who basically just follow modern liberal ideologies that are nowhere to be found in the Torah.
No, I never
right?
said
So,
Jews.
so they have unity on
religious Jews from Reform Orthodox conservative still rely from as a base on the ceremonial law that appears in the Mishnah on how a month was established. Okay, what's said during the Yom Kippur ceremony, which I know doesn't appear in the Torah. From that perspective, left-wing Jews don't compute because they're Jewish by ethnicity only.
Right. So again, I'm saying that there are moral significances, but when you talk about the Orthodox perspective, I think things like what it says in Nida, page 66, that Jewish women, 66a, Jewish women observe 7 days of separation, additional separation from their husbands, if they see amount of blood, the spot of a mustard seed. That's again, rabbis actually clamping down on people's marriages and causing them to be separated from each other for more time during the week. There are lots of moral issues.
But why? Because what's the consequence of accidentally having sex with a woman during her period? It's the worst punishment that exists in the Torah, which is being cut off. It's an Isser Kares. So this is why.
Okay, but the Torah defines a irregular period as blood flow for multiple days. So that's the opposite of a mustard seed. That's explicit.
There's a distinction,
15:25,
between a Zavah Katana and a Zavah Gedolah. Okay,
that's a rabbinic distinction.
The notion of a mustard seed is a Zavah Katana. Right. The extra countings, by the way, don't appear in the Mishnah. Hold on. Don't appear in the Mishnah. They appear in the Babylonian Talmud, and it says it was adopted as a custom amongst the daughters of Israel. But the Mishnah itself only mentions the 7 days. I'm just making a distinction of what's done today.
I can give you another great moral point. I just read the Shulchan Aruch recently. He said, if you marry your wife and you don't go through the proper rabbinic process of marriage, they will force you to send your wife out of your house, even if you're living as husband and wife. But because you don't have the rabbinic piece of paper and the rabbinic approval, they will force you to send your wife out of your house. That's completely immoral.
Okay. So how do you determine marriage from only a Torah perspective?
The Torah says that marriage is a man and a woman becoming one flesh, living together. It's the proclamation of marriage. It's the actions. It's living together. As
you're going to take it upon yourself to conclude ceremonially what establishes a marriage and not rely on some consensus,
it doesn't
which we understand to be, star, bia, and kesef.
No, it doesn't require a Kiddush cup. But yeah, no.
I never said a Kiddush cup. Kesef Star Bia is the standard, right? With some money, and mind you, those three things all have a Torah root to it. Kesef is with an amount of money. Bia is knowing the person, like having sex with them, cohabitation, right? And shtar is some sort of document which entitles one what's called a kinyan, that she's able to acknowledge that she's married, right? And affords her certain rights, right? And two, it's a public declaration that's in some way filed away. These are quite responsible attempts to organize marriage instead of you just deciding, just take her to your house and marry someone.
Yeah.
But you know why it's dangerous? Because if they accidentally sleep with someone else, then you have to unalive them. And then they'll say like, well, I mean, Israel decided I was married, but no one else did. That's a dangerous, like, of not having some sense of consensus.
Again, you would need to have 2 or 3 witnesses that there is a proclamation of marriage in order to have matters of life and death. That's what.
How does that look?
Says.
How does the proclamation of marriage should look? I mean, give me something.
Me and my wife come home and we say in front of our parents and siblings and friends, we are married. There, I have 10 witnesses for you. All right.
Beautiful. So that's great for your house. So with you in the Philippines, how are they supposed to understand that your wife is not available because you said so? There has to be some consensus, right?
No, because we said so. Yeah.
Okay, that's quite absurd.
I mean, there's
again,
no
I'm not
other
deifying the
definition.
rabbis, but
There's
to
no
not
other
view it as
definition.
necessary,
Again,
it's a bit absurd.
There is no other definition in the Torah for marriage. And on the basis of their made up rules on how marriage is supposed to proceed, they're willing to force a married woman out of the house with her husband because you didn't go through the ways that we told you to go through. Okay.
Right.
That's
the
completely
consensus
immoral.
on how people get married.
Yeah.
Even in marriage, that you don't assume there should be a consensus?
No, I assume that people should be able to get married and live that out. And their words, like, what is a ceremony? You get up at the ceremony and you say, I take you as my wife. I take you. I do. Right. And you have the entire congregation gathered there, witness this. Right. So essentially, that's even the benefit of a ceremony.
What congregation is that? I mean, 10 Jews who happen to agree with your rendition of the written law?
You only need 2 people.
Yes, I understand. But
as witnesses for this.
I understand, but these 2 witnesses would have to be convinced that your rendition of the written law is like you say it is.
The written law doesn't give you a requirement that you have to do for marriage in some ceremonial sense. So all you have to do is proclaim it as a marriage. Even take
you don't
Isaac,
even consider someone a witness, okay? Like, you would have to consider them an Israelite. But your definition of an Israelite is invented by you.
The Torah doesn't say only Israelites can be witnesses, first of all.
So so there's no organization here.
I get it. According to the rabbis, goyim and women can't be
I'm not trying to convince you. I'm trying to convince everyone listening, okay, that I acknowledge that the idea of deifying the rabbis, right, as in some way speaking on behalf of God, that's what I'm not for. However, the idea that there's a necessity for some consensus, which is what the Sanhedrin was there to in some way build consensus amongst Israel, that is so necessary just so we could move forward and not get stuck in these ceremonial laws, right? That we're never going to conclude on an individual basis because they're meant to be kept in a unified manner.
But you're willing to break up a marriage on the basis of not following these made up rules by the rabbis.
Like, I wouldn't even consider it a marriage. If someone defined Judaism for themselves, some person in Iceland said, this is what Judaism is, I'm supposed to be comfortable with allowing my daughter to marry their child when it's like the line wouldn't continue.
Even though the Torah's only definition, I mean, even you can take Isaac and Rebekah, which it's before the Torah was given, but still, just so you can get an idea of what marriage is, it says Isaac took her into his tent and he married her and he loved her. She became his wife. And so she's his woman. He married her and loved her. Yeah. Right. So he doesn't even say the word marriage. He took her. Right.
So before the Torah was given.
So
right?
But even after the Torah is given in Deuteronomy 24, it says a man takes a woman. Right. So again, there is no specific process that you have to go through in order for that to work. Simply, you take her into your home. You say, she's my wife. She says, I'm your wife. And for matters of life and death, you need 2 or 3 witnesses to be aware of this.
I think we're pushing for the same initiative here.
By definition will happen because you live amongst people, and all the people who witness you being a married couple and proclaiming yourselves to be married will now know that you're married. So you're saying, you have to put a ring on the finger and get under a chuppah, a canopy, and have a rabbi say a blessing, and now you're married. I mean,
the ring has nothing to do with the ceremony, by the way. I mean, it's a
ring
Sheva Pruta.
Hold on one second. Yeah, it's the money.
Right. Well, Sheva Pruta has nothing to do with the ring. I mean, it's something worth less than a penny.
So again,
however, I think we're pushing towards the same initiative. Okay, you're willing to say that the Torah is so clear that your understanding on what's ceremonial, I mean, should be adopted by most Jews, And I'm thinking that most Jews have already adopted a standard, and that's the Mishnaic standard. Whether someone wants to believe that it was directly given by God or not, that's not important. Okay. But Israel is moving forward in a unified manner, and I don't know why you want to fight against it.
Well, I don't think they're moving forward in a unified manner. I think they're enslaving people with made up laws that people don't need to follow. Within the Orthodox community, they're fighting over whose rabbi has a bigger hat.
Those are modern. That has nothing to do with the Mishnah. That has nothing to do with what I believe.
But like you're talking about a theoretical Israel, and I'm talking about a theoretical
consensus.
Israel.
I'm talking about my position. What appears in the Mishnah, whether you wear a black hat, that's all cultural. If you're in China and you're in Kaifeng, no one's going to wear a black hat and call themselves Jewish. Okay, I'm just saying we are pushing for the same things. Someone else is going to say, you know what, Israel's positions are his positions. And if he makes some sort of attempt to thrust those opinions on me, then he's acting just like the Pharisees. So we're going to end up in the same position. If for some reason everybody agreed with you,
again,
they would create their own oral law.
Yeah, I'm not thrusting my opinion on anyone. I'm simply stating that the Torah.
Everyone else is wrong.
No, I'm simply stating that what we are obligated to follow is the written Torah. We're not obligated to follow.
Correct, but the ceremonial laws are not explicit on how we keep them in the written Torah.
I mean, they are quite explicit, and the parts that are not explicit are not the law. So the consensus of man does not.
Nowhere in the Torah does it tell you how to establish a month. Nowhere does it say that we follow both lunar and solar calendar. Nowhere in the Torah.
Therefore,
you have to conclude that.
Exactly. Therefore, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
It doesn't.
Right.
Again,
okay, so then we can never keep a holiday on the same day. There's no way to keep a holiday on the same day.
We can if we decided to have a consensus, but that consensus is not the law. It's not the law of God.
Whoever said it was the law of God? I told you it was developed by the Sanhedrin.
You're willing to break up marriages on the basis of this. You're willing to not have your children marry someone. You're willing to cut people out of Israel.
Yes.
You're willing to do so then,
like for the sake of the stragglers, right? There's people who will never be a part of a group, who always want to be what's called tivrosh min hatzibor. They want to do their own thing. And I mean, from that perspective, you've separated yourself from the klal, from the nation. Why? Because you're taking it upon yourself not to debate with us on moral issues. I'm pretty sure that the average Orthodox Jew agrees with you at least 90% on what's ethical and moral, but on something ceremonial. Heck, for the sake of consensus, give in to the majority. Say, I'm going to go with the developed standards of what constitutes a marriage, what constitutes a day, what constitutes a month, right? No, but you choose to redefine the wheel, to reinvent the wheel ethically in every ceremonial law. It's a bit absurd.
Again, like you're pretending that these things don't have consequences, but they do, because the reality is that all of these developed ceremonial laws of the rabbis are not in the Torah, and it creates maybe I've separated myself from the community of the Orthodox Jews, but I feel like I've been joined to the community of Israel as a nation under God, and to the larger community of humanity, because I think that that's a much more expansive vision, and it allows for the Torah to dictate our actions, and not for everyone to have to get stuck up in some process of rabbinic understanding. The reality is, I believe that men and women do have the right to get married without a rabbi sanctioning that. I believe that men and women do have the ability to convert to Torah observance without a rabbi sanctioning it. I believe that men and women do not need to be separated from each other for 2 weeks out of every month due to rabbinic false definitions of nida and zava. I believe that you do not need to only eat in a kosher restaurant or buy from a kosher market, and instead of buying 4 times the price rabbinic kosher certified things. These things have consequences. They have consequences of people's
daily life. Not in the Mishnah, by the way. A lot of these things you mentioned, are cultural, by the way. Nowhere in the Mishnah does it say that you need a hashkacha, or a hechsher, right?
Yeah, but yes, you would say that probably the vessels are impure or full of pork in the vessels. You would say that you need meat that's
you would say it also if those vessels are porous.
Well, yeah, I mean, porous is
that's the whole premise.
I mean, but again, the vessels we're using today are not porous. They're not like ceramic or anything.
Well, some of them are. Some are wood. And if you don't know what they're doing in the back room of the restaurant, I think you would want some sort of supervision. But
and again, I think when you wipe things down and you clean them, that's enough.
You think.
Yeah, I do, and I'm entitled to think. That's the whole. This is the whole problem here. Is
but
I am entitled to
ceremonial issues, because the ceremony is the reason we have ceremonial laws is to connect us between man and man. right? Mitzvot ben adam lechavero, right? Commandments that are there,
conversion is not between you and man, it's between you and God. Marriage is between you and your wife, and under
conversion
God,
is it's a two-step process, by the way. You're entering the Jewish people and you're entering the covenant. So it's for sure a two-step process.
And that's in relationship to God. The people don't dictate your entry into the nation. God says whoever wants to be part of your people should be welcome, and there's one Torah for everyone. There is no conversion process outlined in the Torah whatsoever. Yet because someone didn't get a rabbinic certification and they didn't go in the mikveh, the magic Rebbe baptism water, now we're going to say you're a goy and you're not welcome into our family. You're not welcome
the Torah
into
does
our
establish
house.
Liability, and the only way to execute liability is to have a bedrock explaining
so you don't take
what actually makes you Israel and what doesn't make you Israel,
so
right? Because then
people's word
it's easy to say
count.
for someone to say, I'm not really converted, like right when they broke the Sabbath at a time that there was a Sanhedrin in biblical Israel, just so they wouldn't get stoned, right? It's quite convenient if there wasn't a consensus to saying, no, according to this, you converted. Like, no, I interpreted conversion the way I saw fit, and you're free to disagree with whether I'm Jewish or not. You can never run like a legal system like this.
Again, there's one law of the land, so everyone is under the same law. That's the premise of the Torah. You don't need to go through some rabbinic conversion or be pronounced as anything. If you live in the land, then you are under the Torah.
That's not true. I mean, the Torah talks about.
There's like one deviation. It's like a convert can eat
it doesn't say okay. Right.
Not a convert. A sojourner can eat a carcass. Like that's like
right,
the
a
only
ger toshav. Isn't that a powerful distinction that you could give nevela to a ger toshav? That means you can live in the land and not be under that law.
I mean, how about the Sabbath? How about adultery?
Well, that's within your gates. That's within your gates, not necessarily in the land.
I mean, that is the law.
A ger b'sherecha is within your gates. In Israel proper, and no one I don't think till today has determined what's the edge of that border.
Within your gates just means like within your city centers. Like this is the law.
That doesn't mean Israel proper.
What is this distinction you're making?
Within your gates means within your society, your community. That doesn't mean the land of Israel, that everyone inhabiting the land of Israel was forced to keep the Sabbath.
I mean, the law of Israel, the nation who resides in the land of Israel, is the Torah. And there's one Torah for everyone.
This is why it makes a distinction that you can't eat of the Paschal lamb unless you're circumcised. That means that we tolerate people who are not circumcised among us.
Yeah. But they just can't eat from the Passover lamb.
Yeah, so that's part of that one law.
Yeah, but again, so that wherever there are deviations, yes, you cannot. If you're not circumcised, you cannot eat from the Passover lamb.
Right.
If you can eat a carcass, but there's one law regarding again Shabbat, holidays.
No, it says there's one law like for the Ger Hagar, which is the stranger that resides with you. That today we conclude it's a convert, and the Ezrach and the native born, right? Outside of people who identify with the Sinai experience and all that, who happen to live in the land, like I guess pagans. Okay, they're tolerated, right? And you're allowed to give them meat that would be unfit for you to eat. So they're not under this one law. So it seems that we tolerated people outside of the covenant, even Sabbath violators in the land who weren't part of our communities. But within our communities, within our gates, of Ger b'sherecha, right, they must rest because they're part of the community.
There is no distinction made between the sojourner who can eat the carcass and the sojourner who can't. I mean, the sojourner there's one term for sojourner used in the Torah over and over again. So this distinction.
No, there isn't one term. There's Ger Hagar. There's the sojourner who dwells, or the stranger who dwells. Right. Well, you need the suffix to understand who it's talking about. All right. There's a debate on this Ger b'sherecha, this stranger within your gates, on who that happens to be. Right. I think the consensus is more that he's in some way a convert. Right. Again, I don't even like using the term convert, but I mean someone who's in the covenant. But to assume that all gerim in the land have the same status, when it specifically says there's one law for this type of ger. However, like what we call a ger toshav, like you could give nevela, which is a violation of that one law.
This distinction you're making is not biblical. The sojourner that sojourns, yes, ger hagar, the sojourner that sojourns in your midst. That is the sojourner. There is one term used.
Yes, they're circumcised, right?
Well, not always, unless they want to eat from the Passover lamb.
Right. In that same chapter, Exodus chapter 12, it's talking about eating from the Passover lamb.
Yeah, but
And it
it's
says
still,
there shall be one law for these two people. Now, that's not the person who eats nevela, correct?
no, it's all the same ger. It's all the same.
Wait, hold on.
sojourner.
So the person who eats from the Passover lamb and is circumcised is the one who's allowed to eat meat that dies on its own?
Yeah, that's
So
not
then
a
it-
distinction made in the
So they
Torah.
can't be under the same law then.
It's the same law. You found one deviation. There's also a deviation regarding slavery, right? These are deviations that are in the same law. So within this law, it's saying there's one Torah, one law. Yet
What
there are
deviation?
the
Like,
deviations
I'm sorry, like regarding slavery. Like what regarding slavery?
that they don't go free after 6 years, like a Hebrew.
Oh, an Eved. Okay. You mean an Eved Ivri versus an Eved Kanani?
No, it doesn't say Kanani. In Leviticus 25, it says a sojourner, ger.
No, right. No, because ger, it needs a suffix there to understand what type of ger it's talking about. It can't be the same ger that's under the same law. There's one law for the ger hagar, right? The one who's circumcised, who's eating of the Passover lamb. He has the same standards as an Israelite has. Okay, that's established. That person cannot break the Sabbath. That person cannot eat meat that dies on its own or it's torn in the fields. Okay, that's a different type of ger. Ger just means sojourner. Okay, is it a sojourner within your community or what's later called a ger toshav? Right,
Again,
it's clearly a
this
different type of
distinction,
ger.
I mean, it's not that clear. You can have one law with a deviation regarding
So that
eating
makes no
carcasses.
sense. If there's one law, there's one law. God makes no distinction between those who attach
within
themselves.
the same. I mean, again, it's within the same book of the law. So it's saying
All right.
within this book of the law, there is one law
All right,
regarding.
we're boring people. Let's just move forward because we're just going in circles here. For some reason, like we're not going to agree on this. Like one law means one law for both, not one law with deviations for someone who happens not to have a like Hebraic pedigree. Okay.
I mean, the Torah sets up that standard. You're making non-existent distinctions.
Right. So people who don't have a Hebraic pedigree have like the leisure of not keeping kosher, right? I mean, if they don't want to keep kosher.
I mean, it's only one aspect of kosher.
All right. Okay. Not too consistent, but anyways. Okay. I don't know, like if you want to like open it up for callers because at this point we're just
let's
going in
open it
circles.
up.
Are you guys all set? Okay, well, let's maneuver into closing statements. While you guys are doing your closing statements, I will go ahead and drop the link into the chat. So if there are any persons out there who would like to join in for open panel Q&A, you will be able to access that through the StreamYard link provided. Israel, if you'd like to provide your closing statement, please.
Yes. So again, I understand Asher having a desire for uniformity among people. I understand the idea that there is a necessity here. But the reality is that you have to understand that there are actual serious differences here. And to just say, this is the consensus, this is the way it is, follow it, don't change the norm. That just sounds like a stale orthodoxy that's saying, we said this 2,000 years ago, therefore you have to follow it. The reality is that these things are debatable. And as I demonstrated to you within the Talmud and the Mishnah, there are preposterous statements and things that are immoral and negative and wrong. So us as human beings, as Israelites, are commanded to discuss these things, to debate these things, to stand up to corrupt authorities who are just using their position of power to tell you that you have to listen to them. Asher himself is unique among Orthodox. The Orthodox mindset goes way further than what he's even willing to take himself. And the reality is that I'm suggesting to people that they read the 5 books of Moses. At no point in this conversation did I say, listen to me. I just said, read the Torah, read the 5 books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. That's where you will find the law. In the book of the law, it says, do not add or subtract to these commandments. It says to follow what is written in this book. Yes, we can have debates. Yes, we can have disagreements. Yes, at this time in history, when God has concealed his face and we do not have open prophecy and we do not have a active priesthood and we do not have a place where God has chosen to dwell and rest his name, we're going to have some debates that we may not be able to resolve. And that's okay. We don't have to make false appeals to authority. We don't have to pretend that our consensus somehow dictates truth and law. The reality is no one here is under rabbinic law. No one here is even under Torah law. No one's going to put you to death for keeping Shabbat. No one's going to cut you off for eating leavened bread on Passover. This is between you and God. You have to actually decide how you're going to settle your score with God. And the Orthodox community is a small community of Jews. It's the minority of the Jews. It's a very small group of people. So much for calling consensus and majority when it's a tiny minority. But ultimately, it is a group of people that are dedicated to the Torah. I have lots in common with them, as Asher said. However, it should be noted that for people that go against their ceremonial laws and their subjective conclusions, they have very choice words and very negative things to say. And ultimately, they cut people off of Israel, of their community, for not following their own subjective interpretations. Now, I don't think that's correct. I think we have to make a very clear demarcation between the Word of God and the law of God in the 5 books of Moses and our debates, our opinions, our traditions, and our consensus. Those are not the same things. We are able to reform consensus, to reconstruct Judaism and see how things have changed over the years, to see how we can come to better conclusions than these rabbis came to. And I think that's what we're doing right now. And I think it would be more productive. Asher's saying it would be more productive if I would just shut up and follow the crowd. I'm saying it would be more productive if we actually hashed out these conversations and tried to understand the Torah to the best of our ability. Yes, it's difficult, might be a little messy, but guess what? It's necessary, because that's actually the nature of life. And God willing, we will receive more clarity on this. But just to pretend, have mock clarity that, again, has actual consequences in people's lives, the way that they live, the way their marriages function, the way their conversion process functions, the way all these things go, I think it really leads to negativity. And the vast majority of rabbinic writings, I think, are destructive. There may be some good things in there that we can gather about tradition and history and interpretation of biblical law. But ultimately, we need to read it for ourselves, be familiar with it. As the Torah says, speak of these words when you sit in your house, when you walk in the way, when you lay down, when you arise, and teach it to your children, which means you have to know it well enough to teach it to your children. And I will not stop questioning these authorities just because they tell me to shut up. I will continue to reserve the right to use my mind and to actually say what I think. And I think the Torah gives us that permission.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Israel. And Asher, to you, please, your final statement.
I think Israel and I are kindred spirits. We're both outliers. We go against the norm in many areas. I constantly go against the norm. However, I pick my battles, and that's what I'm encouraging him to do. The reason I focus so much on uniformity when it comes to ceremonial laws is because the weightier issues in Judaism are the moral, ethical ones. Right? People don't typically look down on us, for keeping the Sabbath or wearing boxes on our heads or for what we eat or not, but misbehavior. And that's what we should all try to remedy. But we're never going to get there if we're trying to argue how do we establish a month, right? I mean, how do we determine what a marriage is? Right? We at least have to agree on the fundamentals, even though it's fully man-made. In my opinion, man-made, but sanctioned by God. Right? It's an idea that it's hard for people to fathom. They think that if there's a ruling in religion, it must come from God. Right? It must be divine. And granted, there's many Orthodox Jews who even present it like that because I guess it's easier for children to digest. Okay. But no, it's even more sophisticated than that. Fully man-made, fully fallible, right? In the Talmud itself, there's a tractate called Masechet Horayot that deals with the errors of the Sanhedrin, the errors of the oral law. So you're telling me that even the rabbis or the judges of the Sanhedrin understood that there were errors in their rulings, but they didn't abandon them for the sake of moving forward in a uniform manner. And this is where people get stuck on this stage of first stage thinking. Apart from that, I applaud Israel's efforts to make things better, but I think that he should start from this perspective, from the top down and not from the bottom up, because he's never going to make it. And I think that it would be very hard for any of his descendants to even identify as Jewish in the future with some community if they keep on redefining what it means to be a Jew, or that what it means to be classified as a Jew, or what it means to be married, and how you establish a month, and on and on and on and on. Okay, we have bigger battles to fight. So what I propose is tolerate what we call the oral law for the sake of consensus, because as Maimonides clearly put forth, right, and the reason I mention Maimonides is because I know that people who believe in orthodoxy nowadays, I'm not speaking to Israel Karaites, they respect Maimonides. Maimonides laid down the premise that the Sanhedrin, this great court that has its roots in the Torah, is the root of what we call the oral law. And when it says do not stray from the right or to the left, it means to hear, to heed their practical rulings, what we call halacha l'maisa, what you do, not what you believe. People conflate the mysticism, the folklore and legend put forward by rabbis as part of the oral law. That's the problem. That's what gives people a bad taste in their mouth. Not the idea that there's consensus on how we establish a marriage. Okay, that's not the issue that people have. The issue they have is with modern day rabbis speaking in behalf of God, and that's an issue that I have as well. Okay. This is why people in my circles typically start and end with Maimonides when trying to understand Judaism. Why? Because Maimonides existed before the rise of Kabbalistic Judaism, which arose post the 13th century, which in my opinion redefined what it meant to be a Jew or remain a Jew, right? And laid down the mystical framework on how Jewish practices are developed. Okay, that's the big distinction. And because of them, what we call the oral law suffers. But that doesn't mean that the oral law in any way tried to hijack Judaism. It was there as a utility to help us be united in exile. I mean, that was the only reason that these rulings or these debates were written down, so that Israel could be unified, or some sense of unity in the exile, so the day we are redeemed, that we would at least have a place to meet with customs and like rituals that solidify us as a community, whether you believe they came down from Mount Sinai or not. To in some way try to defeat that and reinvent it, I think is quite destructive. And it's not a coincidence why most people who have been traditionally part of movements like the Reform movement, who try to redefine timeless, 2,000 years old, like at least practices on what makes a Jew, what makes marriages. A lot of these people do not have grandchildren that even identify as part of the Jewish people. That's it.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And as a kind reminder, if you wanted to join for the open panel Q&A, the link is being dropped in my live chat, and I believe Israel has dropped it in his. Just click the link and head backstage, and we'll get you guys up here in just a minute. We're going to read a few super chats. Lots of love coming in from the Maynard side of things, saying Tom Carpenter with the big 50, Lechi Alzeyalda.
That's Hebrew. It means go with this girl.
Okay, yeah, that's what I asked him for the translation earlier, and he said basically it's like saying "you go, girl." So very impressive, especially coming from Tom. And to Maters over here, if you want your gauntlet, you are currently sitting at 11 out of 20 on your dono goal. You need to finish it off. And then Tom also says, I have no idea. Go Bamat. I'm butchering it. I give up. Whatever this says, Tom says. Shout out to you, Tom. And of course, Ayatin sending the Mater love. We love you so kindly. And of course, Kinetic Cal doing a drive-by saying, Sarah's Batty, please follow my chat and donate. It's like tithing to your church. Please, chat, help me out. And of course, Lacey agreed and moved on from there. Question for the two of you says, Asher and Israel, do you both agree that what is embedded in moral code is part of Jewish custom and tradition? Would that mean we do as per the holy laws on the basis of how the dynamic changes to attribute both the arbitrary and the sacredness?
It's quite interestingly phrased. I'm not sure I understand that perfectly. Somewhat vague, but I don't think that the arbitrariness and the nature of the tradition is really embedded in the law. I think that the tradition has departed from the law to a great degree, and I think it's very often not even loosely based on the text at all.
Well, I mean, from a a rabbinical perspective, it's never referred to as a moral code, but a legal code. I think we can all agree that morality comes from the Torah. Legality, liability, consensus, this is what was the responsibility of the court to rule into existence. That being said, the rabbinical, from my perspective, ceased to exist after the closing of the last Sanhedrin. Rome made it illegal to give over this authority to judge called smicha, and this eventually led to the dismantlement of the Sanhedrin. So, from a rabbinic perspective, there isn't a progression in our law. Rabbinic code or our legal codes ceased progressing with the last Sanhedrin. So you're talking about the end of the 3rd century. There's a lot of beautiful moral works put forth by rabbis nowadays. What can we say about that? Well, it's just opinion. And there's some beautiful concepts, there's some silly concepts, and that's where self-interpretation kicks in. For anything that's not clear in the Torah or from a ceremonial perspective, has in some way been concluded by the Sanhedrin. So outside of that, if someone wants to give over some personal interpretation on a moral legal issue, then go right ahead. As long as it doesn't contradict the Torah or the consensus put forth by the Sanhedrin.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much. And of course, Tom Carpenter says with the Big 20, he's putting songs in our heads while we're all listening to this. Push it real good. Din, din, din. Shout out to you, Tom. And Max wanted to know, Israel, are you a creationist?
Well, yeah, of course. I believe that God created the world. I don't know exactly the timeline. It's clear that the biblical timeline is traced back to about 6,000 years ago. I do think that the opening verse in the Torah saying that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, then transitioning to a period where the earth was in darkness and chaos. You can read it that the earth pre-existed this current creation. It comes down to interpretation, but I think you can read it that the earth was created all the way back in the beginning by God, but then it was in a state of darkness, chaos, and water, and God came and brought light and life to this would otherwise be a dead planet at that point in time, which might explain why there seems to be ancient findings on Earth. At the same time, I'm someone who's skeptical of science anyway. So, but I definitely believe that God created everything.
Okay. Have you ever been interested in doing evolution debates, evolution versus creationism?
Sure. Yeah. Only to some extent, but because again, I think that in general, when we speak about past events dating back thousands, if not millions, billions of years, I think it's kind of stupid to assume that we know what we're talking about. It's more speculation at that point. But the faith claim of the Bible saying that in the beginning, as far back to the beginning as you can go, God created. And that's the main point. The point is that God created everything. The evolutionary perspective is materialistic perspective. How would all life develop if no divine force acted on it? Although the Big Bang is seemingly something triggered that, and something created the materials for the Big Bang to happen. But aside from that, we're tracing evolution as just like something that would happen without any external spiritual powerful force acting on it. But when you come to the biblical perspective, it's clear that God is a spiritual force acting upon the matter and the material that he himself created, in which case nothing is beyond God, and God can speed up any timeline or slow it down. So I think the main point we have to gather is that God is the creator.
All right, that's fair. I might have to reach out to you. I might potentially have an evolution debate if you're willing to take it. But
sure.
Gentlemen, let's meet our panel. Let me get them all up here. Here we go.
Hello.
Hello.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, to those who are new here, welcome back, or welcome. To those who are regulars here, welcome back. We have a few rules for the Q&A. We are going to go one person at a time. So that means everyone else except for Israel, myself, and Asher, you are all going to mute yourselves and stay muted, and you're not going to interrupt each individual person and their back and forth with either Israel or Asher. This portion is meant to be respectful and in good faith. So you can ask your questions and get through, and we will get through everyone's questions, and then we will move forward into open floor after that. All right, Clay, welcome back, my friend. I expected you to be on here and have a lot of great questions per usual. So let's teach our new friends how to do it, and go on, Clay, to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, guests. Oh, is it too much?
It's high.
You can do it for me?
I can do it, yeah.
Okay. Well, while she's fixing that, I'll talk a little softer, and then I'll raise it up a little bit. But thank you to the guests, Israel, Asher. Really appreciate you guys. 100% appreciate all the debaters when they come on. Sarah really is one of the best hosts you'll ever find. So I really appreciate her. You guys, I was having a little trouble in understanding you guys' position a little bit. I was pretty sure, Asher, that you have the position of that the Talmud is a holy book. Is that correct?
If you're going to define holy as set apart, then yes, it's correct. If you're going to define it as divinely inspired, God-given, then no, it's not.
Okay, very good. And then Israel, you're saying it's not a holy book.
I say it's not holy. It's subjective opinions of rabbis, and in many instances unholy.
Very good. I just wanted to be sure on that before I ask each one of you the questions. So I guess I'm going to go to Asher, because if you believe it's a holy book, I think Israel was kind of hitting this point towards you all night long. I think he did a really good job on explaining his position of why he believes it's not. But I want to clarify for it. When you look at this extended version of essentially the law, the Torah, essentially that's what it is. It's all these cases that could be or might be
hypothetical law.
Hypothetical, right? Yeah. These are man-made concepts. These are thought provoking concepts that essentially a man has sat down and come up with in order to combat some of the things before they happen. It's like, what are we going to do if this happens? What are we going to do if that happens?
That's what the Torah says. It says, in all matters of dispute, you shall go before this court, i.e., in the place that God will choose. Right. So it's a it's a court like to help you like conclude the matter, like, and then that whether you support it or not, it doesn't claim to speak for God, but it seems to be fully fallible, right? But there for the sake of order and consensus.
Right. So, and that's kind of where I think when people are hearing you say it's fallible, that at that point it no longer comes from God, because God is not fallible. So how do you square that circle that man's word is 100% fallible, 100%. easily debunked on most cases? Some things, it is true. And with rabbinical law, that we could say that a lot of these cases, it would come out to the accuracy of what would be morally correct. Mm-hmm. But if it's not, then how can you square and then say it's not changeable? Because at that point you're saying that it's God's law, or excuse me, it's holy. It's holy means that it's divine, meaning it can't change.
See, again, I mean, holy, I'm not defining as divine, nor does it mean, like divine. I mean, kadosh just means set apart. And this is why I said that in the beginning, like of our discussion, it's a concept that most people are not going to understand, that something could be fully fallible and still part of our theology. That's how God functions in the Torah. He tells Moses to acquire these judges, these elders, to help adjudicate the people. That doesn't mean that their rulings are given down by God, but for the sake of order, you're going to elect certain elders, respected individuals, to help you conclude the matter. So it's interesting. That's how God functions in the Torah. I don't know how we got to the notion that for something to be part of our theological system, it has to be God-breathed and God-given. You know, for example, the books of the prophets and the writings. Nowhere does God ever sanction the writing of other books. However, it behooved the judges to give us a timeline of the life and times of our biblical heroes and our exiles to help amplify the Torah, help like remind us like how far we strayed and when we came back, so we can do again in the future, so we can return in a proper manner. But that doesn't mean that only because something appears in the book of Psalms that God wrote it. Remember, God didn't sanction anything else. Yeah. It says lo tosef alav v'lo tigbar mimenu. You can't add or take away. You know, but just like the book of Judges was sanctioned by the court, because it was the court who established these books, right? You know, the rulings of these elders, of these judges, were also sanctioned by God.
Okay, very good. So essentially, when I look at this too, I'm considering, like, is it divine, which is one interpretation of what is holy, or is it divinely inspired, right? Which is more of the interpretation that I think you're giving to it, where if the law is divine, it was literally given to Moses, and he brought them down, right? He brought them laws down. Then the divinely inspired, while we might say it's inspired, in other words, that there are good men who have done good things. Well, I can't even say that. So I would say no man is good, right? But I also can't say that he hasn't done a good thing, right? So I agree with you that we could call it divinely inspired, but I don't think that we can call it holy or divine. Does that make sense?
Yeah, again, I'm not defining holy as divine. When it says kadoshim tiyu, it says in the Torah, be holy as I'm holy. That doesn't mean to be divine. It means to be set apart how he's set apart. It says the holy God is made holy through righteousness. Right? That means set yourself apart by being a decent person, unlike everyone else who behaves like a barbarian. So holy means set apart. It doesn't mean divine or given from heaven or infallible. I think that's more of some sort of Christian dogmatic understanding. It's not a Torah understanding, right? People could make themselves holy just by being righteous. I mean, just by being righteous, you're not going to make yourself divine. I mean, God is divine, you know, but people continue to sin. Yeah.
Is the law? Can you change the law, or is the law set? The law is set in stone, right? So the law
of God is set in stone, right?
Okay, so if a case comes up and the case law is wrong, then that can be changed, correct?
Right. The man-made law can be changed, but the only reason it's put forth in a court setting is because they don't know what the final verdict is, or perhaps, like it says, I believe in Second Chronicles chapter 19, that they give over explanation of the mitzvot, that they explain how you keep Torah laws.
Well, I think my main concern is this. So if I create basically a way out for someone in a case so that they don't have to be penalized to the fullest extent of the law, I create a slippery slope, right? So we see this very much so in secular law, right? So some laws allow very, very loose penal codes, whereas some have a very strict set in stone. This is the way it is. You're not going to get past that. And so when you create these cases outside of what God has set in stone, you're creating a slippery slope in my mind. And I'll give you a good example. And I hate to use this one, but it's like one of the biggest topics when it comes to Orthodox Judaism. That would be suctioning for circumcision. Okay. Mm-hmm. So it's very much understood that this can be a very serious harm to the child, yet it is still practiced even still today, even though medical advances have shown that there are way better ways to handle if you want to do circumcision than suctioning. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, we get it. By the way, like most Jews don't do what's called metzitza bepeh, which is what you're calling.
Yes, sir.
That's what you're referring to, where they use a syringe instead of doing it bepeh, like with the mouth. So they understand that like the spread of herpes and I mean, there's children who have definitely died from it, but we can't deny that it was an attempt to help the child, not to harm the child when it appears in the Mishnah.
It was the medical understanding of the
Correct.
day.
Right. As primitive as it may sound, but yeah.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you addressing it. I wanted to address it early on so that, maybe people can understand it, that it did come from a poor interpretation of medical science of the day, right? And so I wanted to go ahead and address that portion real quick on. But again, right, so that brings us back to that slippery slope because people are not willing to let go of that rabbinical law, and they're not focusing on the Torah versus what we know in medical science to be accurate now today.
Yeah, but they never so the Torah never tells you explicitly how to circumcise, nor what circumcision looks like. So there had to be some attempt, to build consensus around it. Why? Because a child who's not circumcised, I mean, he's also what's called hive karis, like he's liable to be cut off in the community. So it was
I'm glad it's not a rusty blade, like.
I mean, I'm sure they were more sophisticated than that, But I wanted to read here in 2 Chronicles because it reiterated like the authority like of the court. Here it says that he gave them this instructions. It says that you must serve faithfully, wholeheartedly in the fear of the Lord, right? The members of the court in every case that comes before you from your people who live in the cities, whether bloodshed or concerns of the law, commands, decrees, or regulations. You are to warn them not to sin against the Lord. So they're there to expound, to explain to you the law, right? Torah, mitzvahs, commandments, right? Hukim mishpatim. It's basically telling you that the court is building consensus on how you keep Torah laws. And that's exactly the thrust that we see, the ethical or the ceremonial thrust that we see put forth by these judges in the Mishnah.
Very good. And I just want to leave it with this one last question too, if I could possibly. And I know it's going to get into Christianity and the doctrine of Christianity. You both, and this is for both of you, you both seem to be well versed in not only the law, but the rabbinical law and the whole Tanakh. It's great. But if you were to actually get into like, especially the prophecies and the reasons why a Messiah was needed, if you believe that a Messiah would be needed, then you would most likely, I mean, I'm not saying that you would, but the evidence is very prevalent, especially when I hear Israel talking. Almost when I hear him, he's sounding just like the man himself during his very short time here on earth before he died. I mean, the case is there when you understand the law, when you understand what the purpose of the law was, when it comes to Genesis and he will bruise you in the head, and he will bruise you in the heel, and you will bruise him in the head. I mean, these prophecies are so prevalent, and if you could easily just look at the law and understand what it's for, and the Messiah, the anointed one, he is king. I mean, you have the choice to believe it or not, of course. And I'm just going to present that out there because you guys are very, very well versed. Thank you, by the way.
I think we have this in common with Jesus, that we're both trying to call out hypocrisy. I always have a lot to say about people misrepresenting Judaism, whether it's misrepresenting what's called the written law or the oral law. I would say the vast majority of rabbis today, what they put forth or what they call the oral law is not defendable, and it's not the oral law. It's man-made custom. The average person who deviates from what people call the oral law, whenever I ask them what specific issue they disliked about what people call the oral law, 9 out of 10 times it's something that has nothing to do with the oral law, right? It's typically a custom, something invented in the Middle Ages, but they think for some reason if something's rabbinical, it's automatically part of the oral law. It's not true. The vast majority of practices that we have in the Orthodox world do not stem from the Mishnah. Okay, so I'm trying to present them an alternative. Let's call rabbinically authoritative what the Mishnah calls rabbinically authoritative, and that's the rulings of the Sanhedrin, which is a pill that's very easy to swallow. Instead of thinking that some rabbi today could in some way determine, like what's kosher and not kosher because of the way you dress, let's say, right, or something primitive like that. So, we're both calling out hypocrisy, how I believe Jesus called out hypocrisy.
Yes, and I appreciate that 100%. And yeah, you mentioned the Sanhedrin is that authority, and I do believe in delegated authority. I do believe that God did that for men, but the first and foremost delegated authority is your father and your mother, not the Sanhedrin. And then past that, well, as far as here on the earth, okay.
Well, Jesus said that the scribes and the Pharisees, i.e., he meant like the leaders of the time, they sit in Moses' seat to do as they tell you to do, but don't follow them because they themselves were hypocrites. So he's not against consensus and legal authority, but people in some way misrepresenting it and corrupting it for personal gain.
Right. And I don't believe that Jesus is in any way doing that. Sometimes Israelites will make the case that Jesus was claiming to be something that he was not. And I believe that he was who he said he was. And because of that, he makes a strong case for it. Like he quotes scripture after scripture. I'm just saying that you guys are so well versed that you really, it's so much evidence. I want to hear Israel's take on that.
Well, quick, just one thing, for anyone listening, because you seem like you're a real searcher. Just know that if anyone truly wanted to be part of the Jewish people, everyone is welcome to consider entering the Jewish people through some sort of formal conversion process, right? And I'm not even gearing people necessarily to Orthodox Judaism. If someone wanted to enter the covenant, and I'm putting it in a way that I know that even Israel could vouch for, right? If you wanted to enter this covenant of Israel, it's not limited to flesh and blood. Anyone could enter this covenant, just like on Mount Sinai, there stood a mixed multitude of peoples alongside the Hebrews, and they all accepted the Torah. And a few verses later, they're all called Israel. Okay, so perhaps if you didn't know, you could enter Israel and become fully Israel. And I think that's the best way to bless Israel, by becoming Israel yourself.
Well, you know what's funny, and like I said, I want to hear Israel on that too. Is his view on particularly Christianity? A couple of things I said, if you can, but I really believe this, that in order to be Christian, you must first be Jew, right? And then if you are Jew, then you must first be of the Abrahamic covenant. And then if you are Abrahamic, then you are also of Noah. And then if you are of Noah, it goes all the way back, Melchizedek, all the way back to Adam, right? So we're brothers. We're literally human beings. We don't come from anywhere other than the beginning. So we are brothers, regardless of whether we believe this or that. And I truly believe that in the end, God's going to be the judge of all of that anyway. So,
and we'll have Israel respond, and then we'll go ahead and move on, Clay, to let somebody else ask another question.
Yeah, first of all, amen to that. We are all brothers. And as far as the Jesus question, the Messiah question. So first of all, again, when you look at the Torah, the Messiah issue is not central to the faith. you may point out that there are foreshadowings, or you may find a necessity for a leader / mediator. But the Messiah is not the central aspect of our observance. The Torah calls us each to personal enlightenment, personal development, and self-improvement as our road to redemption. So it's not enough just to say, oh, the Messiah will do it for me. We have to do it for ourselves. Now, to the extent that there are great leaders that are given to us, we're given many examples, as you mentioned, Noah, Abraham, Moses being chief among them. To the extent that Jesus came and taught the laws, yeah, you got Matthew chapter 5 saying not one dot or tittle of the law should be removed until it's fulfilled. And the fulfillment needs to happen by preaching, and this is the continuing verse, preaching even the smallest of these commandments if you want to be great in the kingdom of heaven. So for all the people that thought maybe our legalistic debate was a little too tedious, Jesus himself says even the smallest commandment in the law is important, and that will make you great in the kingdom of heaven. So, that is his message. It is a good one. He did fulfill many messianic prophecies, but he didn't fulfill all. And so even from the Christian perspective, there's going to have to be a second coming. So to quote the Torah in Deuteronomy 18:22, if you want to know if a prophecy is true, see if it comes true. So I guess we'll find out what God has in store. And if Jesus Christ returns and, it's clear that he's the guy, great, but the reality is, I think that in this current moment, we need to connect to God, in the present moment, and be the best people that we could be in our own personal lives, and that would be the greatest glorification to be part of the kingdom of God.
Indeed. Thank you, Israel. Thank you, Asher.
Thank you. All great questions, Clay. Well, that's wonderful. Mr. Shaman Omar, next backstage. Go ahead with your question to either of the two, sir. And you are muted. You have to unmute. There you go.
Hi, everybody.
Hey.
Let me give you all an early Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you.
Whether it's
I like the hair.
Or 2 days.
Nice hair.
Whether it's 1 day early or 2 days early, we can argue about that for the next 1,000 years as well.
Hopefully not that long.
I want to say, thank both of you, because, these conversations, demystifying things, are super important. And even if you're talking about basic things like Judaism has a very big PR problem. Obviously, I would say it's by a distinct actions that we're witnessing currently. But these, the ancient teachings have to come out and be shared, right? Good and bad. Nothing is, man interprets everything the way they do, and I think it's part of our job, right? So the way we interpret things is the way we act. But I had a question, Rabbi. You said when you were talking about the Kadosh, you were saying it has to do with set apart. But what is the Kadosh Adonai? What does that mean?
Yeah, it says, I believe in Isaiah 53, it says the holy God is made holy through righteousness. I mean, it's defining how is God holy? The holy God. That means he's made holy by doing the right thing. That's what righteousness means.
Yeah, it means Kadosh Adonai means the Lord is holy, right?
Right.
So holy. That's so Kadosh. So when you said it means set apart, yes.
Correct.
You take something, you set it apart. Now it's separated from everything else. Then it's consecrated for a dedication to God. That's what holy means.
Well, God's not going to dedicate himself to himself. He means set apart from all the other gods or semblance of gods that people knew of the time. I mean, that's what, echad, also means unique. That God's unique in terms of behavior compared to what people called a God back then. So it's all practical. Nowadays, it's a loaded term. Even angels from a Torah perspective are just messengers. Now they're winged creatures. Nefesh is a being, and now it's a soul. It's something invisible. So things progress regarding semantics, but holy always meant just set apart.
Okay. Okay. But yes. Okay, that's how it becomes holy and not a part of everything else. That's what I'm trying to say. It's the same thing. When you take something and we say, oh wow, this is holy, we set it apart. That we're setting apart because it's holy, and it's holy because it's set apart. That's how it remains holy now.
Yeah. We distinguish ourselves by our action. God commands us to be holy. How can you command that? Right? He's telling you to set yourself apart essentially by your behavior, by emulating me. Right? God is telling you to emulate him. We believe that it's a mitzvah to emulate God. Just like he's merciful, we're merciful. So we become holy by emulating a God that distinguished himself from like, I mean, at his times, these false gods behaved worse than people. They would grape, they would unalive
the
people.
Elohim,
Yeah.
the other Elohim of the nations.
Right. Well,
Canaan.
I mean,
Is that what you mean?
like, Elohim could also be humans too, but yeah, fine.
Yeah. Oh no, there were other gods. Like you're only supposed to worship me, right? It means there's other, not the other Elohim.
Oh,
not the
right.
other, like, kings.
Well, that's a debate. I mean, if I mean, he's saying that it's all fake or they actually exist. I mean, that's a debate. Okay.
I didn't. What? I'm talking about the biblical text. I'm talking about all the prophets are saying you're supposed to worship me. I am the Lord. I am your God. He's saying you're not supposed to only. You're supposed to only worship me. And according to my understanding of like biblical Hebrew, that's not saying that there's not other quote gods of other nations, but there's
no. That's what I'm saying. It's a debate. I mean, it's not explicit that God shares the ether with other deities, right? Yeah. I mean, it seems. Yeah. I mean, you can think that.
I understand what you mean. No. I understand what you mean. So, would you say that the Torah is perfect?
Well, I believe in faith. It's perfect. As someone who teaches the Torah, there are some verses that I wish were like written in a way that I can articulate them in an ethical manner easier. And I'm pretty sure like anyone involved in apologetics have been confronted by these handful of verses that atheists use to disqualify the whole Bible. I truly wish they would be written in a way that I could express them better. So there's some verses that
I know what you mean.
I mean,
No,
maybe
I'm not going there. By the way, that's not where I'm going at all. I'm not. I'm not an atheist. I just
right. So in faith, faith, I believe it's perfect. Like, do I understand every verse from an ethical perspective in such a way that I could give it over? No, I do not.
All right, that's my point. So, but in faith, you have faith that the law, for example, like the law is perfect. It's the moral law for this earth, right? It's timeless, and the book itself is the word of God, right? This is your faith.
Yes, let's say like for the most part. I mean, again, there's some verses that I personally wouldn't act out. Let's say, okay. And I'm not going to drag.
You mean like stoning of like long list of idolatry.
Right. I mean, I would probably have an issue stoning a homosexual who engaged in consensual sex. Right.
I mean, that's a different debate.
Right. Right. No, I understand. I mean, there's just some things. Right. I'm an ethical monotheist. So I try to present what's there in the most ethical manner I could. But sometimes I'll say that I opt out. Let's move on to the next question. Okay.
No problem. There's a bunch of Christians here that would agree with that, the exact interpret. Anyway, so my only thing is that if you're saying, like, for example, that the book is holy, the book is coming from God, and there's things that you say yourself that you don't understand, but isn't that kind of the purpose of existence, right? To like uncover the truth, like uncover the mystery in one's own life as time progresses through this blessing on earth that we call life. Isn't that the point?
Yeah. So I believe in the Torah. Okay, I believe in God because of the Torah. I don't believe in the Torah because of God. So I found a book that helps me leave this world a little better than I found it. And that's what I try to do with the Torah. And this is why I teach it, right? I mean, I think it's individual moral training, whether I believe it's divinely inspired or not. Like my realization of God is that he's presented as the ethical lawgiver in the Torah. That's what makes him good. What makes God God is that he's good. And what makes me love God is the idea that he loved me first by caring so much about me that he gave me a higher standard to aspire to, right? For God so loved the world that he gave us a higher standard to aspire to on Mount Sinai by giving us commandments that distinguishes us from the animal, right? And that's kind of like a twist on John 3:16. So that makes me reciprocate that love, right? Like in return, so that's my whole relationship with God. He cared enough about me, to like give me a sophisticated perspective in life, and I return that love, because he first cared about me.
Okay. So, so in your opinion, could a human court or a group of humans that are appointed by us, we the people, right? Let's say within the covenant, can they ever pass a moral judgment that goes against the law of the Torah?
100%. The Torah says it. That when a high priest gives an incorrect judgment, he has to bring a sacrifice.
No, with the Torah. You're saying that's not the court. You're saying can a court of men overrule the Torah?
No. I'm saying, I mean, can they give a moral judgment, trying to understand the Torah, right?
Pass a moral judgment. Pass a
Right, correct. I mean, pass a moral judgment. I mean, if they're judging, it means the Torah is not explicit on like any particular case, so they rule for an incorrect party, let's say, right? If for some reason they would deviate the path of the community, there's certain sacrifices they have to bring. The high priest would have to bring a sacrifice. I'm not saying, like, I don't believe that anyone could override a Torah law. I mean, if that's what you're asking.
Okay. That's my question. But isn't that the problem with the Talmud in so many places? I mean, there's so many places you can point out. Like, isn't that part of the problem?
No, because the Torah understood that they were appointing fallible men. And even in the Talmud, there's a tractate. I mean, it's called Masechet Torayot. It deals with all the errors of the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin made errors, and on that verse in the Torah that speaks about that one judge known as the high priest, when he made an incorrect ruling that he had to bring a sacrifice, the court also brings a sacrifice, right? So, I mean, the motifs are there, that they're not in some way claiming to be, but in some way speaking for God, but they're fulfilling the role that God established for them, which is the role of a fallible judge, like who does the best they can in trying to determine a case. I mean, it's not like the Urim V'Tumim, that it's like these holy dice that God spoke through. These are man-made individuals.
But then, Rabbi, in the same Talmud, Rabbi Eliezer defeats God in an argument. The same book.
Yeah,
so
just by using God, by quoting God.
How do you defeat God by quoting God? That doesn't make any sense.
Like Torah lo b'shamayim.
Why would God say you defeated me by using His own word? That's as silly to you or to me as you would think of God coming down to Himself to make up for the sins against Himself.
I mean, if you have to listen to a prophet,
I'm quoting the verse from the Torah. It quoted the verse from the Torah. It says Torah lo b'shamayim. That means He quoted a verse from the Torah to in some way defeat God.
But if
so God laughed. God
to
said they defeated me. Meaning.
Yeah, the rabbis in the Talmud say that God laughed, but the reality is that
so that's the story. So the person who put forth the story.
Hold on, we're all talking at once.
Can I ask one question?
I'm not trying to be combative. I'm trying to prove a point that the nerve of anybody.
No, but I'm trying to clarify what the story said. Yeah, but that's not what the story said. The story doesn't say that they defeated God, like with their own means. It's saying that they used God to defeat God because they quoted the Torah. Like when He says, look at these miracles that say that I'm right, and the rabbis say, Torah lo b'shamayim hi, that the Torah is not on earth or in heaven, to determine what's right and wrong. The Torah says that the Torah is on earth. That means the rulings of the judge determine whether that oven was kosher or not. Because it was a debate on whether an oven was fit, to be used, right? I mean, so it wasn't a story to in some way make the rabbis look primitive. It's saying that God said that the rabbis were correct because they quoted His Torah to in some way not be deviated from how to legislate.
I agree with you. I'm not arguing that. My point is the nerve of anyone to say and write that they had this discussion with God and that God said, oh, you used my own law to defeat me. My children have defeated me. Can you imagine if someone today give you that?
Yeah, but I don't see the nerve. They're using God's word, to in some way dispel a trap. It was a trap. It was a bosco. I don't think you know the story correctly. It says that a voice came down from heaven. Okay. I don't think you know the story correctly. It says that a bosco, a voice came down from heaven and said that Eliezer, it's right? Because we know that we don't create new religions or like judgments because of miracles. We go by what the Torah says. And then he quotes the verse from the Torah that the Torah is not in heaven, that these rulings are left up to the court. That's a Torah statement, right?
So if a rabbi
so then God says,
I know the story. I'm saying that if a rabbi today told you, hey, by the way, and they sit here and they go like this, and then they tell you that God just told them ABC, their interpretation. You're going to believe that? You believe the Rabbi Eliezer had a direct conversation with God, and this is the truth. A concrete statement.
It's a legend, so like if you're going to believe the first part of the legend, it behooves you to believe the last part of the legend, right?
And the Talmud gives way for legends, just like Christianity has a lot of legends, and legends take messiahs. A person is supposed to be a human savior. Legends pile up on them each other. This is my last point.
I don't believe this happened, by the way. The reason I say
that's
legend,
why I was asking you.
Yeah,
it's a
okay,
story.
you know-
I understand. I understand. I'm trying to say the problem is, this is my last sentence, is that legends, you know, when I had a conversation with Rabbi Tovia Singer, I asked him, where does the Messiah come from? He tells me, I said, no, as far as Moses, oh, it's not there. He said, 2 Samuel chapter 5, Genesis 49:10, I'm sorry, about the scepter. And I was like, that has nowhere there says anything about a savior or Messiah to come. The scepter falls from Shiloh, etc. And that's second. The temple going back to the first location, right? It's kind of basic. But when you take that and you preference that, and then later the Messiah story piles and builds, and now you understand where Christians go. Now the Messiah has to be the
it's a
son
non
of God.
sequitur. You know, the
No,
Torah
it's not
itself says
non-sequitur.
that God is going to send you.
Okay. Of what we do with legends. That's my only point.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not in any way elevating legends to anything. I don't believe in these midrashim, agadot, whatever you want to call them. The Torah itself says that God is going to send you false prophets to test you. You know, now, from that perspective, you can't look at that story that these rabbis had audacity. If the story is telling you that this is what's happening here, God is testing his people, and his people, by using God's words, right, in a joking manner, defeated God or saw through the test. That's it. I mean, there's no audacity there.
I think there's a huge audacity.
Can I say just one short thing about that, if that's possible?
One thing quickly, and then we'll move on to the next
because
question.
in the story, it's saying that the voice was God's voice. So it wasn't just the miracles; it was God Himself spoke, and then they overruled God. Now, if you have to listen to a prophet, of course you have to listen to God. Now, unless you're saying that it wasn't clear that voice was God, but
it doesn't say God; it says Bosco.
Yeah, but then later on, it was saying God was the one who was speaking. And by the way, the same verse that you quoted to say these and those are the words of the living God was also a boskol. So a boskol apparently just means a voice of God calling out from heaven.
Yeah, it's a legend. No, boskol means like the voice of a daughter, right? And then historically, it means a divine voice. You know, and then at the end,
I mean, is it God speaking or not?
No, it's a legend. First of all, it's a legend. It's not to be taken literal. But the legend does not contradict itself. See, I mean, people take the first part of the legend and say, "Oh, because of the last part of the legend, I'm going to accept the first part, but not the ending of it." The ending concludes.
No one's believing. One second. No one's believing that it's true. It just shows the rabbi's view of their authority, that they have the ability to overrule God speaking from heaven, even when we know that it's God, and God just.
No, they're not overruling it if they're quoting God Himself, saying that God says that the court has the authority, and God also says in the Torah that He Himself will test you. So God was testing His children to see how they would respond, and they responded correctly. You know, so where's the audacity?
Again, why do you have to listen to a prophet, but you don't have to listen to God Himself if He speaks to you?
Because even if God Himself,
they were experiencing prophecy, God was speaking directly to them, and they're like,
so that's a legend.
The Torah is not in the heaven. The Torah is not in the heaven means you don't need a rabbi to go get it for you from the heaven. But the reality is, if God is speaking to you, that's prophecy. So you should probably listen to what God says.
So that's not how prophecy works. After the Torah was closed, no prophet could establish a new law or a new expectation or a new commandment. The job of the prophet is only to bring you back to Torah observance.
But prophets can establish a debate. This was a dispute. It wasn't a new law. It was a dispute about the existing law. Deuteronomy 18, you should listen to what the prophet tells you.
They're concluding a case saying that this was kosher and this wasn't kosher. Okay, that means they're establishing a mitzvah that this is the way it's done, while that was the job of the court. It was the court to give you the final ruling. And that's what the rabbis were reminding God of. And God says, you're right, because I was testing you. So you in some way defeated me in this game, because from the beginning, I wanted you to answer like that. Right? I don't see the audacity.
So you don't think we could rely on prophecy post-Torah to settle disputes? Even though
I don't know why you're defining that as prophecy.
God speaking to people is prophecy.
That's not prophecy.
Let's go ahead and move on to the next question. If you guys are still sticking around for gauntlet mode, we can certainly put a pin in that one and definitely hash that one out later. But I do want to be respectful of the time because I have allowed the first two questions to go a little extra long. Andy Lai, welcome to the show. You are muted, so make sure you unmute and your question or comment to either of the gentlemen.
Hey, Rabbi Israel and Asher. You might have known that I'm actually a student of Rabbi Israel from
Andy, how are you?
3 months ago. Yeah, I'm actually sitting in the Starbucks. So to give you a little background, I'm actually not Christian. I'm not Jewish. I'm actually Buddhist, and I'm from the Hindu tradition. And in fact, why I was brought here is because a lot of things that is going on in Israel has spread to India and to China and other complaints in my neighboring countries, and they're not very happy with you guys. Like literally. Now, one thing that I've been just watching as a spectator is that I was wondering if you say that the Talmud is inspired by God.
I never said
one
that.
thing I want to ask you, as a Buddhist, I ask this to Christians too. How do you know if you're listening to God versus if you are listening to man?
Okay, so I never said the Talmud is inspired by God, but the rulings, the final rulings in the Mishnah, are sanctioned by God. Now, granted, it's a leap of faith that we believe that the judges that appear in the Mishnah are who they claim to be, and they claim to be the product of a process called smicha, ordination, going all the way back from Moses. And it appears like this in a book called Pirkei Avot. It's in the Mishnah that lays down this process of ordination all the way from Moses, passed down from teacher to student, till around the 4th century that it was dismantled because it was made illegal by Rome. So this is why we believe it. Now, the other reason, which is probably as significant, is that Israel needs direction on ceremonial law, to build consensus on how we keep areas of Jewish law that don't necessarily deal with the moral, with like what we call mishpatim, but hukim, laws that we don't really know the reason for. We don't know why we have to eat pork, or like why we can't eat pork, or why we have to keep the Sabbath, from an ethical perspective. I mean, there may be some ceremonial reason. So you better believe that there has to be some consensus on how we do it, and then Israel's not going to have a ceremonial semblance of itself. Everyone's going to be doing something else. Someone's going to have pink fringes, another one's going to have green fringes. Some people are going to put tefillin around.
It says blue.
I'm sorry?
It says blue.
Well, it says techelis. I mean, it doesn't say blue. Like, you interpret techelis to mean blue because of rabbinical tradition, by the way.
Translation, not interpretation.
Techelis doesn't mean literally blue. The rabbis say one interpretation means blue from the sky, but it's a rabbinical interpretation.
How do you know any word means anything?
Oh, so by rabbinical interpretation, okay, it means there was a consensus put forth by the leaders of Israel that we're going to understand it to either mean blue or green, because Rabbi Meir said it's either blue or green. But by the simple fact that you conclude blue, it means that you go by the majority of the rabbis in the Mishnah, which I applaud.
I mean, I would say that words have meanings and definitions are preserved. Otherwise, how do you know a table is not a chair?
Well, techelis doesn't mean blue.
There's no other word for blue. There's argaman is purple and techelet is blue. Yarok is green. Yeah, it does.
Right. I mean, yarok means green. Techelet doesn't necessarily mean biblically blue.
I mean, there's no other meaning for it.
Actually, there's a lot of words that we can't define without rabbinical tradition.
So in other words, you're basically saying, Rabbi, is that in order for me as a Gentile to really trust that you're doing the right thing, is that basically you're relying on a lineage that has already been broken since Rome, and then you're trying to reconnect yourself to God through trusting the fact that these people are doing their job, which as a Gentile, I don't even know if they are, because I never knew you.
Yeah, I don't think rabbinic law has anything to do with necessarily bringing you closer to God. It's trying to give you an outlet, some consensus on how to keep the ceremonial that appears in the Torah. Lamaisa, like how to do it. I don't think it's there. And although the rabbis have a lot to say on how to connect to God, all right, in anything that they say in the moral and the ethical, that's just opinion, because I don't think that anyone could improve on the morality that appears in the literal Torah. However, the ceremonial, there has to be some semblance on how to, like, for it to be kept in a uniform manner, or then it's useless. If everyone's going to keep the Sabbath the way they see fit, okay, then no one's going to keep the Sabbath. If people are going to determine what a marriage or what a divorce looks like the way they see fit, then no one's going to accept someone else's divorce or marriage. So on the ceremonial, right, which is the authority of the judges, the command is to tell you, for them to tell you what to do in terms of the practical, not what to believe, not how to connect to God. That's what the Torah is for. But to assume that you're able to in some way be part of a community and understand ceremonial laws by self-interpretation, that's a leap that that I'm glad the
Correct.
majority of Israel doesn't
why
take.
does it matter? Because let me tell you straight up how I, as a Buddhist, when I sit back and watching you and Rabbi Israel debating things, is that why I actually came to Rabbi Israel to study the Torah, and I love coming to him more, is because number one, when I read the Torah versus when I read the Talmud, all right, as a Buddhist who have no opinions about the Bible or any of that stuff, or because I was raised Catholic, one thing is that when I read the Torah, when I read it, it's like as though my energetic body started to give out a glow. It gives fire. It gives conviction. It gives me saying, this is true north. It's power. This is coming from like the mystical tradition in the Buddhist culture, where when we read something like through the words of God or anything, it gives power to people. Versus when I read the Talmud, it's like I'm at best talking to 5 different rabbis who at the end of the day, they almost like have no clue who God is, and they're trying to guess. So at the end of the day, I was like, why should I waste my time going after reading the Talmud or Gemara or all that stuff when the Torah is all I need?
So I would only conclude that you're not making an attempt to keep the ceremonial portions of the Torah, which is why you're not looking for a consensus on how to keep it. If you're only focusing on the beautiful ethical stories, then you're never going to need a court to determine how to keep ceremonial law, right? I mean, this is why Christians have no issue, like trying to understand how to keep like Yom Teruah or Sukkot, because for them, works, the ceremonial, have been tossed away. Right? In exile, it's hard like to even see a semblance of biblical Israel. But as Jews, we're trying to reestablish that connection that was severed. And part of that reestablishment is connecting to the land and to God through these rituals and ceremonies that aren't necessarily rooted in morality. I'm not saying they're immoral, okay? But there has to be consensus on how to accomplish them, because God makes no distinction in the Torah between moral laws and ceremonial laws.
Right.
I mean, you said that you align yourself with the Hindu perspective. I mean, but they have a pantheon of gods. So it seems like you take what you like from the Torah, like just like you take like what you like from the Quran, and like do the best you can with what you understand. But till you identify with biblical Israel, I don't think you're going to make an attempt to keep all of biblical Israel's ceremonial laws.
Like, why does it matter? Because let me tell you straight up, like what a ceremony in a Hindu tradition. I believe Rabbi Israel knows this, because you know a Hindu better than I. You know me more than anybody else. Is that Buddhists and Hindus, when we do a ceremony, they say, if something brings you closer to God, does it lead you to higher consciousness? Does it make you become more patient to people? Do you become calmer? Do you have a sense of compassion for others? If it does, you're doing the right thing. But if you start to devolve where you start to act, you steal, you lie, you commit adultery, you're basically going the wrong way. That's actually how Hindus like myself would think. And so pretty much like that's the reason why at the end of the day, I'm trying to figure out, okay, like, how do you know if that is from God in the eyes of someone who's a Jew? Because so far, I haven't found that answer to be answered directly here.
Yeah, it takes faith. At the end of the day, in terms of the ceremonial, apart from taking a utilitarian approach that it's quite practical to have everyone doing everything in a similar manner, it takes faith to believe that the rabbis or the teachers that appear in the Mishnah are who they claim to be, which are direct academic descendants of Moses, Joshua, and every individual who sat on the court before them.
So in other words, you're very similar to how it's time I'm going to tell this to Rabbi Israel, and maybe he can jump onto this. This is not much different from how the Hindus, they place faith in their gurus, who actually gives them the transmission of God, or from Lord Shiva, from Vishnu, or any god or tradition they came from, and give it to you. But
I don't think these rabbis are trying to give over an understanding of God, but how to keep practical ceremonial laws in a uniform manner. If a rabbi has, and there's many like rabbis who will give you a rendition of what they think God is and what he expects from you, all that is conjecture. However, if the Sanhedrin ruled something into existence legally, it was binding on all of Israel at the time to keep it. Okay, that's a big distinction with what a guru, tells you in trying to dissect God theologically.
Well, it's very different from how a Hindu would say it. Like
Yeah,
I
but
know
Buddhism and Hinduism are different religions, man. What are you talking about?
Shaman, mute up.
Sorry.
So yeah, he's right. Hindus, like, they believe in what we call a permanent existence of God, but he's expressed in so many different ways. The thing is like that's
it's
very
not a monolith. Hinduism, you're like,
yeah, I know.
I go to India every year for a month. I've been to India like 3 times every year for a whole month, from Varanasi, to Rajasthan, and there is no monolith in Hinduism. It's just like a placeholder, for religions of the region.
And Buddhists, we're like we're part of the Dharmic culture, but we're more of like, what do you call it, a non-theistic God, where we believe that God is not a personal God. So pretty much like that's the reason why I have a problem with the rabbis, because in our culture, if they basically there is a council of debates in Hindu culture where they basically come and there's a head rishi that actually will that you will actually settle a debate with. But one difference, all right, is that they basically come together in what we call a higher consciousness, where they see it in that lens of God, that you have to be in that consciousness. Otherwise, like if you're debating in a human form, of course you're going to be all confused. You're all going to kill each other. And that's what happens. So I don't know how Rabbi Israel would handle this, because I came from a different culture, and if this is brought over to my place, everybody, 3 billion people will start murdering each other right now.
Right. Well, I'd encourage you to put Hinduism or Buddhism aside and consider becoming a Jewish person, and take up the challenge that Israel and I have taken to understand every law that appears in the Torah from a practical perspective on how to do it. Right? I don't deny that Israel is a serious searcher, and like he's making an attempt, as I'm making an attempt, to live by the precepts of the biblical God. But picking and choosing, like I like this of this religion, and I like that from that religion.
I'm definitely not what we call a cherry picker. I'm actually what we call like a person who tries to go deep into something and really see what's behind there.
Right, many different things. Right. So if it's many different things, then you're a cherry picker, respectfully. But I encourage you to consider becoming Jewish.
And let's go ahead and thank you. All great questions, Andy. Let's go ahead and move on to Lord Snow. If you have a question or comment for either Israel or Asher, now's the time to do so.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Just know that my Wi-Fi isn't very good, so if there's like a break in it, just let me know. So I have a question for Israel Horowitz. So you don't believe that any book beyond the 5 books of Moses is canon, correct?
I don't believe that it's binding law.
So like you wouldn't consider like anything in the Tanakh, like the Nevi'im or the Ketuvim canon, correct?
Well, what do you mean by canon? Like, do I call it the Bible? Sure, it's the Bible. Do I believe that it's binding law? No, because the Torah says you cannot add or subtract to these commandments.
I agree, by the way.
Sorry, I didn't hear you. I didn't catch what you said, Israel.
Oh, I said it is part of the canon of the Bible based off of how historically it was ordered. However, it does not have the ability to contradict the Torah, because the Torah is the foundation, which says you may not add or subtract to it.
Okay, so it's like part of... So my question is, I guess, the best way to articulate is, if you don't have any oral authority, then who's to say that you can't add Jubilees? Because what are we defining as the Torah here? Who's to say we can't like add the book of Jubilees to the Torah canon?
Oh, you can add it to the biblical canon. I don't, again, just the bottom line is nothing can contradict the Torah. You can add the book of Enoch. You can add all these things. At best, it's history, or it's poetry, or it's speculation. But the reality is that the Torah is going to define the law, and that is the law that you may not change, you may not add or subtract.
Why? I mean, how could you? I mean, Jubilees also has ceremonial laws. I mean, who's
Yeah,
to say
but
that Jubilees isn't part of that?
Jubilees is not the Torah. Jubilees is not the Torah of Moses. The Torah
What's
of
defined as
Moses,
the Torah
the
of
5
Moses?
books of Moses: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. In the end of Deuteronomy 32:24, I believe, it says that Moses completed writing this book upon a scroll, completed it to its completion. So that is the Torah of Moses. That is the law. Any other book is just simply not the Torah of Moses.
Does it specifically say that these are the books like Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, the way that they've been outlined historically, are the books that must always be part of the Torah?
I mean, it's quite clearly the narrative structure of the Torah, speaking. Moses is writing down these ancient narratives as well as recording the history and the laws that were given during the 40 years of the Israelites in the desert. So that is universally understood as the Torah, cross culturally, across all of history.
So you would believe that at one point they did have the authority to add new books to the Torah canon, but they just ended after.
No,
Is
they
that
did
correct?
not. No, only Moses had the authority to write the Torah, and the authority was vested in him by God. So once that
Yeah, so
was
that is
completed,
authority.
it's completed. Yeah, but it's not his own
Okay.
personal authority. It's the authority vested in him by God, and once it's completed, it's over.
So without the authority like inherited to Joshua, how would we know that that the Torah wasn't part of what Moses writ? That the Jubilees, sorry.
I mean, Jubilees is like a separate text. It has different narratives. It's like the Torah is not just like repeating itself. The Jubilees is a different book. It's not the book of Moses. It's a different book. So
It says things that are relevant to Torah observance, though.
yeah, it's relevant. So to an extent, it's probably commentary or mythology written around the Torah of Moses, but it's not the Torah itself.
Okay, I think I understand where you're coming from. Asher Meza, can you like weigh in on this?
Yeah, so I agree with a lot that Israel is saying here. There's 2 statements in the Torah that are clear. Moses utters this, that we're not allowed to add to the commandments that are being transmitted through Moses. Right. This is why the prophecy of Moses is on a higher level than any other prophet, because like Moses could command you to do things. The job of every other prophet is to bring you back to the commandments that were transmitted through Moses. And it says that if a prophet doesn't do that and adds or deviates or gives you something that you didn't originally receive, you have to take him out and stone him. So these books, for the most part, I mean, Jubilees wasn't canonized, but the final canon was put together in Yavne. And the rabbis in the Talmud argue for what books to include and what books to exclude. I'm not saying that
That's
they
kind
were.
of sorry.
Yeah,
That's kind of what I'm getting at. Like, without the authority of this oral tradition that was passed down from the Sanhedrin to Yahweh, how would we know which books to include and which not?
You're talking about the larger biblical canon, not the Torah. The
Right,
Septuagint was written way before Yavne. It was, and it's the exact Torah. The Samaritan Torah is the same Torah. So it's the Torah being intact through the Christian tradition, through the Samaritan, through the Essenes, through the Septuagint is identical almost across, like with minor variations. That is the canon of the Torah. You want to talk about the larger biblical canon? I don't really care what you included in it.
But what if the biblical canon were to contradict the Torah?
Then it's wrong. Doesn't mean it's not the Bible. There are lots of things in the Bible, especially, I mean, that I think you can argue contradict the Torah, but it's still the Bible. It's just the
Okay,
canon.
well, we would kind of define it as part of the Torah because it's like necessary
not
to understand
part of the Torah.
how it.
No.
I mean, I think the Torah could stand alone without these other books. I mean, these books are there to give you a historical account of the Jewish people and how God acted and reacted throughout Jewish history, not necessarily that they're to add anything new. Yeah.
Maybe I misspoke when I said the word Torah. What I meant was sort of like divine scripture.
Still, by divine, if you like viewing it as a progression in our theology, then it's not acceptable. Right? It's there to bring you back to the Torah, to amplify the Torah. The problem is, let's say Christians, for example, and I love Christians. I think they're quite ethical. But if you ask them to justify their theology, 9 out of 10 times they live in the prophets. right? But even if like the prophet specifically told me that Jesus was the Messiah, I'll be like, thank you, let's say Isaiah, but that's a little bit out of your pay grade to command me to do anything that the Torah doesn't command me to believe, right? Or do. So the job of the prophet is there to bring you back to the Torah, not for you to take their words and create theology out of it, because that's how Muslims view it, right? Muhammad is the final messenger, thus he gave you the final revelation of what God expects from you. That's not the role of a biblical prophet.
But doesn't the Talmud like extensively quote from the Tanakh, like saying like, hey, we should do this because of this, which is written in this part, and it's not always the Torah?
No, so there are a few examples. For example, there's like on the Sabbath, we have a practice called like Oneg Shabbos, like to rejoice in the Sabbath, and they quote Isaiah 55. The Sanhedrin took it upon themselves to take a verse from the prophets and create what they call a rabbinic law. Like Oneg Shabbat is considered a rabbinic addition, like on how to keep the Sabbath, because it's not from the Torah. Even in the Talmud itself, they weren't going to include the book of Ezekiel. Why? Because there's errors in the book of Ezekiel on the measurements of the sanctuary. Where they weren't going to include the Song of Solomon. They weren't like going to include Ecclesiastes. And then via debate, man-made debate, they decided to include it. Even towards the end, like Beit Shammai would never include it in Megillah Esther, like the book of Esther, right? So it's like men decided and debated which books to include that they thought were in some way edifying, but they weren't in any way trying to add to the Word of God.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I think the biblical canon was put together by men, and I don't think anything in the biblical canon has the authority to contradict the Torah.
All right, let's go ahead and move it on to.
I think I understand where you're coming from.
Thank you for your question, Lord Snow. We appreciate it. Let's go ahead and move on to Spin. Spin, do you have a question or comment for
Thank
either
you.
of
And
the two?
by the way, Asher Meza.
So you have a delay?
Can I say one more thing? Sorry.
Yeah, quickly, please.
Yes. First of all, Asher Meza, it's really nice to talk to you. I'm actually a Ger, and you were one of the first people I ever listened to about Judaism and the Torah, and it's nice to actually talk to you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. And Spin, let's move on to you, sir. Your question or comment to either of the gentlemen.
So I'm interested in one thing. What does the Talmud say about war? That's to either of you. Or what is its teachings about war?
Nothing comes to mind off the top of my head.
I mean, what does the Torah say about war?
Yeah, the Torah talks
it's not
about
pleasant.
war.
I'll tell you that. I mean, it's one of the things that are a little hard to articulate. Instead of like, for example, the beautiful captive, like of war. It clearly was an elevation to how people treated captives, but it's for sure nothing we want to emulate today. But yeah.
Yeah, the Torah says when you come to war, you first call out in peace. So peace is always the first approach.
Interesting.
And it also says, the Torah says, if we follow God's commandments, there will be peace in the land. So Leviticus 26.
So the war right now, you're saying your God or your emulation of God or whatever you think is God called for the conflict between Israel and Iran, right?
Well, I think obviously human decision making plays a role in all that. But the fundamental idea is that if our emulation of God and his commandments for us are not in alignment, then that will end us up in wars and cursed situations. So it's ultimately a product of our sin.
Yeah, well, Israel's a secular country, by the way. This is a religious discussion.
Yeah, but Israel is under religious obligations.
No, I get it, but it's not run by religious leaders, who got them into war for religious reasons. I think we should make a distinction between synagogue and state here. Like the IDF is not a resurrection of biblical, like the biblical military of Israel, like nor is Netanyahu, like a resurrection of the biblical king of Israel. It's a completely secular government that puts forth secular initiatives. And I mean, she didn't speak in behalf of the Torah that they don't keep. I mean, I lived in Israel for 5 years, and they're like most religious people are dissatisfied, at least from a religious perspective, on what Israel has to say regarding religious matters. And I support Israel, I mean, as a country, but I make a separation between the Torah and the secular state of Israel.
Yeah, but I think anyone who wants to claim to be Israel is going to be under Torah law.
Yeah, I mean, from God's perspective, for sure, but I mean, the Knesset is the majority of the people in the Knesset, the majority of people in Israel are not religious, so yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Spin, for your question. Code Searcher, to you, please, your question or comment to either of the gentlemen.
Oh, all right. Well, all right. So I'm kind of here because of Israel Horowitz here.
How's it going? I saw your video.
Yeah, I just did a video on you here recently, brother. And I know the panel here might not be familiar with what I'm about to talk about, but it's very significant, and I want to encourage you to pursue that a little further. You guys, he just did a video here recently about not celebrating Shavuot at the time that the rabbis claim in the Talmud there, when it is. And incidentally, I've been teaching for about 6 or 7 years Christians who are Messianic believers, who are coming out of Christianity, who are hung up on this day called Pentecost, which is a counting of 50 days, right? The upper room, Acts 2, right? The problem is the agriculture doesn't line up to what people observe, the 50 days. On the other side of that, we see, what Leviticus 23 says, 7 Sabbaths complete, and then you add 50 days. There's a reason why it's broken like that, because we're talking about 2 different grains. The first one is barley. The wave sheaf is done with barley. 50 days later, it's harvested because it's golden at that time. When it's done at a wave sheaf, it's just becoming ripened, right? Still got 50 days. That's when the sickle is put to the grain. Deuteronomy 16, the standing grain is the barley. Then there's still 7 weeks until Shavuot. Now, if you look at the pattern laid out in the Exodus, Deuteronomy 19, they're not getting the law yet, right? It's been, they left on the 15th. It's the 3rd month when they get there. It's 59 days. They bathe themselves. 3 days later, 62 days right there, right? The law hasn't even been given yet. And they're saying this is Pentecost. Well, if it's Pentecost, we got to have wheat to make fine flour and wave loaves of bread. The specific wheat in ancient time, and it's been grown for 7,000 years, is emmer. It's a spring wheat planted at the equinox. This is why Israel, when you see in Exodus 9, the barley was smitten, but the wheat was not, because it was just grass. It was blades of grass just coming up. Only been growing for about 14 days. At wave sheaf, when you're doing barley, 50 days later, the wheat's not ready at that point. It looks like green wheat. It's just got a head on it. It's still got weeks to go. Okay. So at that 50-day point, that's barley being harvested there. I've put more than 500-600 hours into study in this biblical agriculture, brother. I've had cattle, sheep, goats. I'm a master beekeeper. I plant things. I've had a farm in Hawaii. I've been around agriculture a long time. I've studied this a lot. It doesn't line up, and you're on to something. I want you to pursue that a little more. What you see the rabbis doing, and I did study this timeline too. What the rabbis do, 7 Sabbaths complete, 50 days. They count omers. You don't see anywhere in the text that says to count omers. It says wave sheaf. And then we're counting weeks. That's why it's called Festival of Weeks, not the Festival of Omers, right? And then what's on the other side of that? If there's 50 days more or 7 weeks more at the putting the sickle to the grain, Tammuz, 3 weeks of mourning leading up to what?
Destruction of the temple.
Tisha B'Av.
Tisha
If
B'Av,
you
yeah.
do the correct count of 7 Sabbaths complete, including 2 new moons in there, it's 102 days. It falls on exactly the 1st of Av. So you got a 3-week period and then 9 days where they come into the courtyard, they breach the wall, they come into the courtyard to the 9th of Av, where the rabbis have determined this is a time of mourning, right? How could you have any time of joy? Well, the true Shavuot and the day that Moses came down with the tablets, that's 102 days on that count. That's the time where the Torah was given, where the law was given. It's not when the covenant was made. And it doesn't line up with the grain right there. And it certainly doesn't line up with 50 days right there. It's more like 60 days. Right? So I would encourage you to look at
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. I hear you loud and clear. And by the way, Asher, this is an example of people having Torah conversations that are not sanctioned by rabbinic law.
Listen, yeah, I'm not a Christian, by the way. I came out of Christianity because Christianity is, I love the other Asher, Meza, but Catholicism is just as wrong as the rabbis. I'm telling you, it is. I came out of Christianity. I follow after what Yeshua was, and he was Jewish. He was more like a Karaite. He was clearly against the Pharisees. He was about keeping Torah, keeping the feast, but he was not about the Pharisees, right? And he said that they put laws on people that they weren't willing to keep themselves, right? They accused him of not, washing his hands, all the things that's in the Talmud. Yeshua, it's clearly he came against the Pharisees. So
yeah, absolutely. I will say, as far as my current understanding goes, by the way, for anyone who doesn't know, Shavuot is the festival of the harvest. And so that's what he's talking about. And within the Shavuot model, Exodus 34:22 states that it's a celebration of the first fruits of the wheat. So,
that's right.
So the way I've been understanding it, and again, I'm open to your disagreement, is that it's the entire count is wheat related. So you would begin counting at the beginning of the wheat harvest. And it says count from the day after the Sabbath, 7 complete Sabbaths until the day after the 7th Sabbath, 50 days. You shall count 50 days. So I'm viewing that totality because 7 times 7 is 49. The day after the 7th Sabbath is the 50th day. So that would technically be the 50th day is Shavuot in that reading. But I commend you for reading the text yourself and backing that up with your extensive agricultural knowledge, which most of us don't have.
Yeah.
So
I'm just pointing out that the agriculture and what actually happens in the count all the way up to Sinai validates that Shavuot is further down the road than it is at 50 days. It's not right there at the 50 days. That's barley being harvested there, by the way. That's the ancient grains. And it's not what they're doing currently in Israel with GMO wheat. Okay. In ancient times, wheat was always harvested in the summertime, not in the spring. Never in the spring. I noticed that.
Yeah, even now it's closer, much closer to the summer than the spring. But they're celebrating.
Well, they can get it in May. They can get it in May, but those grains are not the grains from the Bible.
Not the
those are something else. Yeah.
Understood.
Yeah.
Well, God bless. And again,
good to talk to you, brother.
Yeah, good to talk to you too. And I think this is like the perfect example of like when we actually have doubts and we don't understand. Asher would appeal to authority, say, let's just all follow what the rabbis are doing. But I think, we all have the right to make our case from scripture.
Not just scripture, but, you can use witnesses like the agriculture and actual dates given, there's chronological count that's there. You can see from chapter 19 to 24, that's all one day. And then Moses goes up 40 days and comes down with the tablets. So 62 plus that time is more than 50 days. The law comes down. That's when Shavuot is. And what were they doing? They defiled the very first one. And the temple is destroyed there both times. And then a lot of bad things happen over the years to the nation, if that's actually confirmable, right?
That's for sure.
So what do they do there? They warn. And I noticed that it also says in the Talmud that they agree, that some of these rabbis agree that when the Messiah comes, he's going to reverse all these things and turn it back to joy. Am I not correct in that?
Yeah, I think
Is that
that's
not
in the
true?
prophets. It's in the prophets. Yeah.
It's in Zechariah.
But is it not in the Talmud as well that someone I can't cite.
Yeah,
I'm
the
sorry,
Talmud
I'm not versed
speaks
so
of
good
that.
in the Talmud.
Yeah, the Talmud
But
speaks
I
of
got
that. Too.
rabbi friends, and they have told me that there's somewhere somebody has said when the Messiah comes, he's going to reverse all the
It's in Zechariah that days of mourning there will be days of feasting.
yeah. But Amos also in Amos says that he's going to turn the feast into mourning, and then there's a reversal of that, right?
God
All
willing.
right. Let's go ahead and move it on to Britt. Last and final question of the night, and then we may or may not go into full gauntlet mode. At chat, you know what to do. Hit it up, please. Britt, question or comment to either of the gentlemen? You are muted, by the way. I don't know if you know that. Britt.
She's taking a shit.
She's taking a shit. I can't unmute you on my end, Britt, but you'd have to do it on your end. All right. Well, here's what I'm going to do. We're going to go into a little bit of open floor session. I am going to switch over to the gauntlet. However, chat, if you want to get that extra hour after that, you owe more. So, all right, Shaman, I know you've been tickled pink sitting there. We are now officially open floor. If anybody does want to leave at this time, they're more than welcome to do so. But Shaman, go ahead and kick us off while I get the gauntlet kicked off.
I mean, I just want to say, like, the one guy that came on, it seems like a nice guy, but he's referring to Hinduism and Buddhism as one uniform religion, which is like completely, it couldn't be more of a deviation. I mean, Hinduism has upwards of 33 million gods and deities that they think are all living right now. And Buddhism is more of a philosophy that doesn't mention God in any way whatsoever. Although people will worship the 28 canonized Buddhas, but that's what humans do. We have to worship ourselves, right? So that was just crazy. I've never heard someone merge those together. So as a matter of fact,
from zero to affinity.
It was just like, it's like saying, hey, we're talking about fruits, but then I mentioned mountain and tree, or mountain and glass or something. It just doesn't make any sense. Anyway,
Yeah, probably just referring to like the Eastern religions in comparison to the Abrahamic faiths.
Nah, bro.
Just
I mean,
lumping them together.
No, Buddha. Okay, it's fine. Doesn't make a difference. But it was just the point is there's no such. It's not a merger of two religions.
Yeah. Can we get back into the Bava Metzia 59?
Can I be heard?
Oh, yeah.
Welcome back, Britt. We got you. And while everyone, I have your attention. If you're watching over on the Raging Tomato side on YouTube, we are officially. Hold on, Britt. We can hear you, but hold on. Go ahead and move on over to the gauntlet now if you know where you're going. Otherwise, I've set up the raid. I'm going to shut down everything on Raging Tomato side, and we will only be, as far as my people, we will only be on the gauntlet. Thank you. All right, Britt, go ahead with your question, baby girl.
I have two, but I'm not going to pretend like I'm a big fan of this type of people because of what's going on around the world. I do want to ask, particularly, who believes that the Talmud is a holy book? Which one of you? I'm sorry, I didn't catch that in the Thank you.
I believe it's holy in the sense that it's set apart and elevated to help us execute ceremonial law, but not that it's divinely inspired, given by God.
So a group of rabbis conversating with each other is holy.
Well, the Sanhedrin, which I believe are the descendants of the elders, judges, and scholars that Moses put together to help us adjudicate case law. It's for sure part of our theology, so whether you want to call it holy or not, like, again, I don't define holy as divine, but yes, it's in fact, it's fallible and it's still required by God.
Okay. So I wanted to ask particularly about the curse of Ham for Canaan. Is that something y'all actually believe, that black people are cursed? Because it says that in the Talmud.
Well, it says, no, the rabbi can go ahead if you like, but I could just tell you what it says in the Torah, that Noah cursed his son Ham for mocking his nakedness. Nowhere in the Torah does it specify blackness as being at all related to the curse.
It did.
I think
it actually does.
I think she's
dark-skinned and light-skinned.
Mormonism. Mormons teach that, actually.
Yeah, maybe
No,
in the
sir.
Talmud.
I don't confuse that.
Rabbi Meza, are you familiar with the Talmud specifying blackness?
Yeah, I don't think it specifies blackness, but it does talk about the region, possibly of the descendants of Ham. It says curse is Canaan, right? Right. I mean, that's the Torah wording. It doesn't talk about necessarily the color of the skin, but I think the region. I mean, just in modern day Hebrew, when they say, Cushi, like people interpret that as black. But the region is like, the Sudan and like possibly, southern Egypt and Ethiopia, but I don't think it mentions the color of the skin as black. But yeah, there are many people who concluded that because of the descendants.
The Talmud Sanhedrin 108b says Ham's skin was darkened.
Oh, okay, there you go.
That's Talmud though, that's
the Talmud. Yeah, so that the Talmud is clearly stating blackness as the sign.
No, that's not necessarily blackness. There's a lot of people who have dark skin. Yemenites, they have quite skin, like,
yeah, but
their skin is quite melanated. So to say blackness, black has many different shades. To assume that they're saying that all black individuals are descendants of Ham, that's
but
not
we know
even
black is dark.
geographically.
Sanhedrin 108b says the punishment was. Part of the punishment was the darkening of his skin. That's the Talmud.
Which one is that?
Yeah.
Where
So
is
that
that?
has nothing to do with blackness, because the vast majority of blacks don't hail from Sudan and Ethiopia.
And Kush, by the way, is also Afghanistan at those time periods, actually. So it's not.
Even the wife of Moses was a Cushite, and she was a Midianite. So,
right.
Cush. It's like listen, it's very hard to actually trace back who's descending from which one of the sons of Noah. But yes, the idea of blackness being the symbol of the curse is particularly Talmudic. In the Torah and the Bible, it never states that at all.
I'm actually reading it differently. I'm seeing it here. It actually does. But
in the Bible or in the Talmud?
My other question, in the Talmud. My other question is, what didn't Jesus fulfill?
Again, I don't have much of a dog in the fight, but what he didn't fulfill, which is the reason why Christians believe in the second coming, is world peace and knowledge of God among all men.
So you think his second coming is that he's going to fulfill some things that you think the second coming is going to be?
I don't think that. Christians think that. That's by definition.
No, we don't ever think that his second coming is going to fulfill anything. His second coming is to destroy everything. Not fulfill anything. He's done his job already. Y'all already rejected him. He's done with the conversation. So he's not talking anymore. He's coming to actually destroy everything because y'all won't listen. For the millionth time, he's been showing that he is the Messiah. You won't listen to him. In fact, y'all chosen Rabbi Sneetson as your Messiah, and he hasn't resurrected. So y'all still waiting on that.
Okay.
But
I'll definitely take Jesus over Rabbi Schneerson any day.
Neither one of these guys have Schneerson in their
Yeah, we're not Chabad. We're not Chabad. Yeah, no, but I think Christians understand that the second coming of Jesus is him returning as the reigning, Mashiach ben David. Because there's two renditions of how people portray the Messiah, which is being meek and coming on a donkey, or the fall of the donkey, which is his first coming, and then his second coming, him coming like the reigning king. So they do believe that's a fulfillment of prophecy. Right. I mean, I don't believe that, but yeah, they do.
And there are
This is why this conversation is good, guys.
To
because you see
destroy,
how there's
though.
still-
Well, look, there are multiple prophecies. That's why, we stick more to the revealed law so we know actually how to behave. But within the prophets, there are prophecies about
Y'all
world
doing a
destruction.
terrible job today.
Okay. There's a prophecy about
I'm
world
just telling you, bro.
Okay.
All
There's
right.
a prophecy
Look,
about world destruction and world peace.
So, lady, what you didn't even know that his return is
World
considered a
peace.
fulfillment of
World
prophecy
peace
by
as
Christians.
a piece of Lebanon, a piece of
So it's
Syria,
incorrect
a
that he
piece
only
of
comes to
everything,
destroy.
huh?
That you believe that he's going to come to judge. That means he's going to judge people favorably, right? To judge the righteous and the wicked. So it's not only to destroy.
Not, he don't have to judge you favorably. He doesn't.
Hold on, but
No.
Rabbi Asher, don't most Jews today believe that the Messiah is coming for the first time and he's going to do the same thing? That they think that.
Yeah, no,
what
most
she
Jews
just
don't
said?
believe Jesus is the Messiah. There's some Jews
No,
who
but
do, by the way.
What she just said.
Yeah, he's
that
burning
Jesus
in
is
hell.
Going to do. No, I'm saying what she just said that Jesus was going to do. There are many Jews today that believe that the Messiah is coming for the first time with the exact mission statement she just described.
Yeah, and there's some Jews who agree with her. I mean, they believe the
And
Lubavitcher
that's
Rebbe is
why
coming
we have
back also.
Zionism. That's a Zionistic eschatology.
If the
That's shared
Messiah,
by
if
both
the
Christians
Messiah was
and-
coming back, why hasn't the Messiah come back already?
No, I'm just
Answer
simply
that
saying
question.
that eschatology is.
Oh, I'm not
consolid-
asking you, Shaman.
Oh, sorry.
I'm asking. I'm
Gotcha.
asking the supposed
No, I got you.
rabbi.
Who? Oh, I don't believe the Messiah is coming back. I don't believe the Messiah came. Yeah, but I'm saying what Judaism believes. I mean, there's many different factions within Judaism. There's one group, like someone mentioned, that believes the Lubavitcher Rebbe, right? Like Rabbi Schneerson is the Messiah, and they believe that he's coming for a second time. There is one notion, it's not very popular in the Talmud,
Why hasn't he come back?
Oh, I don't know.
Tell
Why
me
hasn't
why.
Jesus come back? I don't believe in the Messiah like being the Rebbe.
The answer to your question is you don't know.
I don't
We on
believe
the
that he's the
80th
Messiah.
year. We on the
You know,
80th year.
Like, I don't believe that he came the first time as the Messiah. Why would I believe that he's coming back the second time as the Messiah?
Shout out to
How the hell are you
Ayatin sending
Jew?
the Big
How
Ten.
the hell- what the-
Shout out to Ayatin sending the Big Ten. Says, bring on the gauntlet. I'm granting some grace tonight because it's a very niche topic. And I know those who are here do want to talk about it. But I did add what you do owe to continue after this hour into the Dono goal. So I'm not going to let you get away with another free hour if you don't hit that one. All right. Just so you know. And also Frosty sends a Big Ten, says, Asher, is there a division between holy purity of a sort into the purity of what exists below in form of social tradition and that which is above God's spirit? If that is true, then Jewish law would be perfecting below as above. I agree with you. Any thoughts to that, Asher?
I don't understand the question. By below, she means on earth versus what's in heaven?
In a form of social tradition, what exists below and that which is above. If that is true, then Jewish law would be perfecting below as a. So, like, what is below is based on what is above. So, therefore, it is perfect because I think that's what they're saying.
She's saying that where the authority of humans come in to dictate law, I guess we can perfect what is above by being below.
I mean, maybe like if we had the authority to establish or refine theological concepts, then I think that that means that we can affect that what happens above. But I don't think the role of judges has anything to do with the metaphysical, but the practical in terms of how do we execute. I mean, how do we practice ceremonial the requirements that appear in the Torah? That has nothing to do with like dissecting God or in some way trying to make God more appealing. It's just dry law. That's it.
Yeah, but it
I do-
no
can
doubt
I-
it enriches your life.
Can I say this? I have a few more comments to this. You were saying that it should be separated from secular, the things that's going on in the war that you said to I think
Right, the state of
Angry
Israel.
American.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
You said it was
we should make
separated.
a
It's-
separation between synagogue and state.
Yeah, but it's not separated. One is waiting on the Messiah to do the same thing that the government's doing, and the other one is the government's just doing without the Messiah. So it's really not separated. Number
The state
two,
of Israel is a
this is
secular
another
entity.
reason why. This is another reason why Jesus had disrespected every law it could in the Judaism law, because he was trying to tell you that if you do not have God in your heart, while you are doing these traditions, then you are still not worshiping the Father. You're worshiping somebody, but it's not the Father. And that's why he was doing what he was doing. So that's why he healed on the Sabbath. This is why he did what he did, because
There's
y'all
no
still don't get it,
prohibition on
and y'all
healing on
still
the
don't get
Sabbath.
it today. So
There's no prohibition on healing on the Sabbath. Like Matthew 23 says that the scribes
you
and the
can say
Pharisees,
that,
they sit in
sir,
Moses'
but
seat. It says, do what
was.
they tell you to do. Matthew chapter 5, verse 17 says that he didn't come to destroy the law, but to fulfill it. And anyone who breaks the least of these commandments will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. The notion that he went against rabbinical laws or Torah laws is not in the Torah. He called out the hypocrisy of wicked Jews, just like we call it out today. But that doesn't mean that the system itself was broken.
It was broken. It was very much broken because they were giving not giving to the people. They was keeping the money, the change in the
that
synagogue.
system.
So
No, I mean,
anyway, that's what I had to say about that. And thank you, Sarah, for the opportunity. Thank you, Chad. I really appreciate it. I love y'all. And
Thanks,
I'll be
Brett.
here just listening.
You're not going to thank us?
Hey, gentlemen, to confirm, you were saying that
Probably not.
you were saying that exact thing. You were saying that Jesus was arguing with the Pharisees, in essence, about their interpretation or leniency of the existing law. He was specifically arguing with them for the law. It was not a different law.
Right.
Correct?
And the Pharisees aren't, they're not the parents of the oral law. It was a sect of the time. The Talmud makes fun of Pharisees. It says there's 7 different groups of Pharisees.
Yeah, I understand. I'm just saying, clarifying that, because it was.
So then, what makes the rabbinical law any different than, say, the U.S. Code, right? So if we're all trying to reach some moral high ground in reference to what is righteous, and you're looking at rabbinical law as, that higher ground, what makes that man's law versus the U.S. Code, which is a man's law, any better than, that reaching?
Yeah, so, I think that's a great comparison. Rabbinic law of the time was civil law, civil consensus on how to run a society. It's not there to bring you closer to God, right? The Torah is there to do that, but it's trying to build some consensus on how they're going to understand and practice ceremonial edicts. That's it. They're not there to introduce God or to dissect God or explain God in a different manner.
They do that, but
they do it, but that's not their job.
It's not binding.
Yeah, correct.
I could make the claim that U.S. Civil Code is divine then.
Well, if you believe the Constitution was divine and U.S. Civil Code was there to keep you in line with the Constitution, then I think that would be a fair comparison.
If you're in the United States, you should be hold the U.S. Constitution as sacred. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, well, you should elevate it. Above every other law. Israel biblical Israel was the nation, and the lawyers and politicians were the judges, right? Like, we view them as rabbis nowadays, but they were trying to adjudicate case law, civil law, but the Torah was there to connect you with God if the rabbis weren't.
So in your ideology, President Trump is a rabbi?
No, President Trump would be, I guess, the equivalent of a king, just because they didn't have prime ministers in biblical Israel. Modern Israel has a president and a
David,
king.
then.
I'm sorry, a president and a prime minister. What?
Yeah, he'd be like David, whereas Scalia would be like a rabbi.
Right. Scalia would be a member of the Sanhedrin.
Right. So, look, and here's the thing. Most Christians probably don't disagree with that view, actually, here, especially here in the United States. Again, going back to delegated authority. However, when it comes to law, it's either, God's law or man's law, right? So if man's law were to break God's law, like, so if I'm working for the government, right, and they tell me that I need to do something, and that's their law, right? Then I would be breaking, and if I did that thing, it would actually break one of God's codes in the Mosaic law. That would not be good. There's plenty of codes within various countries throughout the world, including the U.S., that do not agree with Mosaic law. Like when you get into Mosaic law, we're talking about like real severe punishment for penal actions
for big crimes.
Yeah, for
you
big
got,
crimes.
Of the 613 mitzvot, you have to if you take out ritual sacrifices and you take out like holiday stuff, that's like half. That's like 300 to 350 that's left, right? And of those, like let's just call it 300, right? Let's just say half of those that are half that are done. Those are pretty well spelled out for the people, right? And Moses said many times in Deuteronomy, like four or five times, you're not supposed to add or diminish from this law, right? Jesus comes, and Jesus basically was arguing, in my opinion, it's all over, like Matthew, for example, he was saying not a jot or a tittle will be changed with law until et cetera, et cetera. He says, I did not come to change law, fulfill, like Asher mentioned, right? So he's arguing with the ruling party of the temple at the time, who were referred to as the Pharisees, right? Then he dies, whatever, just leave out the mystical part. Then you have Islam that comes. And so as I referred, if you take away everything that has to do with temple or holiday, let's just call it 320 mitzvot. Of those 320, that's for the person for their lives. Over 80% of those, by the way, Asher, you said this earlier, was incorrect, sir. Over 80% of those laws are in the Quran. The entire Quranic law, 80%, is exactly the Torah law. And of that 20% is just very small differences of their interpretations about bathing and et cetera, because they are Ishmaelites, which are the son of Abraham. They're not.
What did I say that was wrong?
You were saying that the Muslims, they have their own interpretations of things. They say, unlike the Muslims, they have a different interpretation.
Oh, no. That's
their
what
own
I said.
laws. Issue.
No.
They have their own laws.
No, I said I was talking about prophecies and prophets. So they believe that Muhammad is the final messenger, thus he could give you a different theology. For example, they could eat rabbits and camels, and they don't have to keep the Sabbath, and they could in some way rewrite the narrative of the Torah because Muhammad said so. Yeah,
okay.
Islam is quite similar to Judaism.
You obviously don't know anything about Islam because I just told you that 80% minimum. Okay, so you do. So no, am I correct or incorrect to what I'm saying?
I just gave you examples that Islam is similar, but they believe that the job of a prophet is to some way progress our theology.
Their laws are from the Torah.
I never said that Islam completely invented the wheel. Okay, clearly. However, they deviate from Torah law because they believe prophets are allowed to override what previous prophets said.
That's absolutely incorrect. I'm not a Muslim, by the way. That's 100,000% incorrect.
All right, so Muslims don't keep the Sabbath. Muslims eat camels. They eat rabbits.
What you're talking about is the 10%. I said 80% is Torah law, 10% is their own rituals and their prayers and etc. But there's the overlap. So what you're missing is how many times a day are you supposed to pray?
I mean, as a Jew or a Muslim?
Well, you don't. Muslim 5, everyone knows. As a Jew, you're a Jew. How many times are you supposed to pray?
I mean, I'll make this educational.
Could technically 2, 3, 4, 5, right?
Okay, wait, hold on. I mean, I could explain it, but like my answers are like a little deeper than that. It's technically 5 times, but we lump it into 3 segments.
Okay. And a Christian's supposed to pray?
It depends what denomination they belong to.
Mainly they would correct me. It's mainly 3, right?
No,
or 2.
I never heard of that, but
we don't have.
It's very simple.
For a requirement, except for that.
The early teachings were when you wake up, you rise and give thanks, and before you go to bed, you give thanks. That's 2.
Oh, that's in the Torah. Yeah, but that's not part of Christianity.
Talking about yes, it is. And before every meal, that's 5.
I mean, Jesus only said regarding prayer. I mean, he said like the Lord's Prayer regarding prayer. Like he never gave you a schedule when to pray. The Torah says when you awaken, when you.
That's not my argument. I also know that Jesus spoke Aramaic and he's had a word that's similar to Allah.
Well, he was Jew.
He went to his knees and prayed. No, he had differentiations in the practices, which could be part of the reasons why you would say he's actually, in fact, changing.
But if you understand what Jesus came to do in the theology, he came to fulfill. So once Jesus laid out what that fulfillment was, then the changes that would occur through him. So no, the requirement for prayer is just simply what to pray for. It's not
what was the name. What was the name for God? What was Abraham's name for God? El Shaddai. And El Elyon, as referred to.
It was one title. I mean, that's one title.
Okay, it was not. So it was not El Shaddai.
No, it's one title. I mean, it was also Elohim. It was also
Genesis 12:3. Who's Abraham talking to directly when he becomes Abram to Abraham? Who was he talking to? The name.
Abraham referred to God by different names. Even the Yud Kei Vav Kei is connected to Abraham. You know, so I mean, you're saying that only Abraham, I mean, like used El Shaddai. I mean, it's a title. I mean, that's not even a name of God. But anyways,
that's your interpretation. I'm actually going objective, concrete, literal. In Genesis 12:3, who was he? What was the word for God?
In I mean, I have to see. You know,
it went from Abram to Abraham. It was El Shaddai.
It also says in Exodus, God tells Moses, "I revealed myself with El Shaddai to the patriarchs, but now I'm going to reveal myself as Yahweh." But Yahweh does show up with Abraham too. Like Abraham calls out in the name of Yahweh, but he interacts with God under the terms of El Shaddai. That's what God tells.
I don't
Moses.
know why we're getting hung up on this. Like this is a gotcha. I was trying to get to it. Every time I speak with you, Ash, I'm trying to get to a point, and you keep.
No, I know, but
like we're arguing.
You're making these definitive statements, like Abraham only communicated with God under El Shaddai.
I'm making a definitive statement because he's referred to as El Shaddai, obviously, unless you don't know that. Also El Elyon, correct? And this is both yeses. You know, so
yeah, but it's not only those two. That's my point. I mean, Abraham spoke to God with many different titles, and even later on, it says that God communed with him, like with the Tetragrammaton. You know, so it's like, yeah. I mean, it's not a definitive.
Okay, and then moving forward, Moses was revealed, and he says, "Oh, by the way, I am Yov He Vav He, and I revealed myself to Abraham as El Shaddai, but I am in fact this name, right?" Which is a new name. I'm not aware, by the way, Rabbi Israel, you're saying that he was Yov He Vav He in Torah. That's new for information for me. I'll certainly look it up. And then later, Jesus, who said he didn't come to change the law, he's using the name of Allah in Aramaic for God. So is everyone talking about different gods, or are they talking about the same God? Are they all different Elohim?
No, it's the same God.
So Jesus and all of them are talking about the same God.
Yeah, I mean, his name is the four-letter name of God, and everything else is just titles.
Okay.
Yeah, that's my understanding of it as well. Omar.
Yeah, the only problem is if you look at the actual historical information of the area of all of the land of Canaan and various other Semitic tribes and Ugaritic texts and so on, there's actually, even if you look at the original story, there were post-flood, there were 70 Elohim for 70 tribes and 70 parcels of land. Come, let us make God in our image.
Elohim doesn't necessarily mean the God of Israel.
If there's
it just means a powerful one.
Elohim's plural. I know it's a classification of a being, right?
A being, right? So a spirit.
Well, no. I mean, it could be a human also.
If you're going to talk about God, and what are you going to call him? You're going to call him a spirit being. You're going to put him in that classification. That would be a title.
I'm only pointing out that they're all throughout the Semitic tribes of the land of Canaan, which they were trying to refer to as Israel. There were various Elohims that were worshipped by various other Semitic tribes, and we have Ugaritic texts from 13 to 1500 BC, at the time when Moses was alive, that names different ones, whether it's Asherah or whether it's Dagon in Lebanon today, etc.
Elohim doesn't necessarily mean the God of Israel. Like humans are called Elohim. You know, the courts are called Elohim.
No, I'm not saying that it means the God of Israel. I never said that. I'm saying
El was a Canaanite god. So
El Shaddai is, I think, what you were saying. El Shaddai, which is also
El Shaddai and El Elyon when he was speaking to Melchizedek.
But those are titles. And that's my understanding of it as well.
I don't know. The interesting part, if you look up Ugaritic texts and others, there are very Dead Sea Scrolls, etc. There's a lot of different names of other Elohim that were the national gods of other tribes at the same time. So if we're going to pick one and say this was the actual one, I mean, it was, there.
Right. So that's kind of way. So look, I'm not going to pick on you about this, but that's kind of how the way religion works. Like, this is how gods are picked or chosen, or at some point, like, you gotta say, okay, that's the one who did it. that one right there. Or you can go with, which I kind of agree with you in a way. I think it's Yahweh. I think it's Yahweh. Like I believe that. I really do.
No, but what's Yahweh? You're saying you think it's Yahweh?
The Almighty One, the Creator, the original, the flat text. There's nothing.
That is the name. The name is Yahweh. El Shaddai means God Almighty. El Elyon means God Most High. The word El just means God. Singular for God. Elohim is plural for God. Yahweh, Jehovah, is the name. And in Exodus 3:15, he tells Moses, "This shall be my name for eternity."
And
I spent the last few years diving deep into the stories of Genesis as told through the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Masoretic text, the Ugaritic text, and other Semitic tribes. And if the interpretations of the storyline is the same, which gives credence to it, it collectively, but very specific details are very different. And if you look that up, those details are actually very big in the scale of a singular God, like whether the Yod He Vav He is the creator of the universe, or at the time when this was being spoken, did they all collectively have their own Elohim? They over here pre-Israel, these people worshiping Baal, and Baal was the national god of them. Yahwism was that before it became the land of Israel, which happened through
let me ask you this. Is there any other one that's claiming?
I'm just saying
it like in all of those.
No, they claimed El. They said El.
Did they?
And then there were Elohim.
Almighty God, the Creator.
Let's get to the root of the question. That why haven't you converted to Judaism yet?
Me?
Yes.
Rabbi Asher, I do appreciate your. First of all, I thought this debate was going to be like a full blown. The Talmud is holy and sacred. How dare you situation. It's actually really refreshing to see someone like you who's holding it, but also not defined by it, right? Because it would have been twice as much fire in this.
So this is more like the Yemenite approach. If you want to see other rabbis who hold the same way, there's a rabbi called Rabbi David Bar Chaim, a lot more knowledgeable than I am. There's Rabbi Yonatan Alevi. There's Rabbi Chaim Ovadia. There's a lot of rabbis who teach like this, and it's more a like Yemenite Maimonidean style of Judaism, which is not Kabbalistic. It's pre-Kabbalah. So it's going to seem more reasonable, more purposeful, all of the above.
Yeah, no, I consider myself obviously a student, and I study all of the others as well, but all of the Abrahamic faith. So I can have this conversation with you guys. I get into with Muslims, I get into with Christians, book, chapter, verse. Like it's not a problem. It's just, but I also am going into a collective unification, right? I just don't like, for example, the Talmudic today. The Talmudic rabbinical Judaism is very similar to the way that the Christians have the Ortho Bros, which if you're not in this is the only church, if you're not a part of it, you're a heretic. So you might as well be a pagan atheist, right? And so I think that's absolutely inherently wrong. I think that Zionism is the plague to Judaism and Christianity, the same way Wahhabism is the plague to Islam. So all three of the Abrahamic faiths have the same plague of what I call the Erev. And I'm a student, so I don't need to be, put my box around myself until God or sends an angel to tell me, and then I will follow.
The angel of God is Jesus.
Yeah, one day, maybe with you guys' blessings, it'll happen. I will receive the light.
Yeah, well, I pray we all get there.
I was gonna say, Shuf, feel free to jump in at your leisure. And welcome to the panel.
So I did want to tackle one other thing as well. So I was curious on how you guys, because we kind of tapped into it a little bit with the U.S. code, the law, secular law. How do you guys view, I guess, secular systems? Do you see that as like something you should participate in?
Can I respond? Because I do have to get going. I'm so sorry. But I'll just respond real quick that like we did talk about how the Torah is like extreme, really, and it is, and I think it's necessary, and I think that ironically, in a lot of ways, the Muslim countries, kind of to Omar's point, are keeping Torah law better than Israel. Like sometimes you hear like the Israelis being like, "We're so good because we're secular and we're not religious," and it's like, well, that really undermines your purpose of being Israel. So I think the Torah is balanced. It is severe, but it does contain clear truth. And I just want to thank all of you. I want to thank Sarah for having us on, and Omar for making the connection originally, and Asher for doing the debate. Thank you so much, guys. God bless. Thank you.
To add to this,
how do I end it, Sarah?
No, you're not allowed to until God decides.
You froze it up too. She'll remove you here in a second.
Okay.
But yeah,
Maybe
she'll remove
remove-
you in a second.
remove.
Well, unless you already know how to.
To add, Clay, to add to Rabbi Israel's point, right? The thing is like when we say like, oh, look at these Muslims, they're covering their head and they're doing this crazy stuff, which I agree. I don't think you should stone someone to death.
Israel. There you go.
He's out.
I don't personally think you should stone.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
Me?
Oh no, he's got the lag thing from StreamYard where he can't hear us. He's gonna have to go out and then come back in.
Come out. Yeah, it happened to me in the beginning.
Shaman,
So regarding
can you hear
secular
me?
law, modern day,
Shaman, can you hear me?
We have this principle of Dina de Bachuta Dina that
anybody
we're
hear me?
supposed to submit ourselves to the law of the land as long as it doesn't violate Torah laws. Now, surprisingly, this concept doesn't exist within the land, right? If you're in the land and they're telling you to work on the Sabbath, you have to. I mean, even in America, they tell you to work on the Sabbath. You're supposed to violate it. Like in that work, if they force you to do it in order to save your life, okay, there's certain allowances. But yeah, I mean, I think Jews, for the most part, not necessarily religious Jews, are disproportionately represented in the legal system, and for sure unfortunately in the Democratic Party. So yeah, like we're definitely involved in the secular and the political. I am politically conservative, right? Like most Orthodox Jews are, and we vote our values, and we encourage other religious people to do so as well. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So this is kind of where the slippery slope argument actually takes effect here. Like, so people would say I'm Christian because of what I believe. I don't actually call myself Christian. I call myself a man. I'm just a fucking man, you know, just roaming around here on the planet, and I got my belief systems and all that stuff. But when it comes to specifically political systems, I do believe there is also a degree where it's definitely not possible to participate. And I also believe that it's difficult to stay out of that because it does affect so much of your life. It's like living as a Jew in Rome at that time, right? Participating in a legal system that you have no faith in, it just presents a massive dichotomy for you, where you now have to choose between two masters. Actually, Jesus pointed that out. You cannot serve two masters. So I'm at a loss when it comes to that, because while I understand and I recognize 100% wholeheartedly that I should not be participating in any political system ever, but it's hard for me to square that circle because it affects so much of my life. How do you deal with it?
I think the best is the enemy of the better. If you don't try to impact society with your values, society is going to impact you, right? I mean, just see how many vaccinations your kids have to take. Just so I mean, those who in some way retire into piety and think that God has your back, well, I mean, God's giving you the ability to be influential. So it behooves you to align yourself with like-minded individuals, whether you're Jewish, Christian, or even Muslim, and try to dilute like the atheistical trend. And that's the biggest enemy of them all. I think there's nothing worse on this planet than an atheist and their religion known as leftism. So like I think those that know better should do better. And yeah, like Israel aside, right? So yeah, do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, too, like, I know that I'm coming from a place of that I will absolutely agree with both of you way more, you two particularly, than I will agree with probably most Christians today. I still believe that the Messiah is king, and I believe that he fulfilled prophecy. And actually, that's a good line of questioning. How do you feel about the prophecy? I think you mentioned something about how that it isn't there for the prophets to come and, what was it, change the law or something like that. I can't remember exactly what you were saying.
Right.
Hebrew Bible or Christian?
Christian Bible. I mean, Jewish Bible. I mean, yeah, there aren't any prophecies in the Christian Bible, are there? I mean, they just reiterate Jewish prophecies.
No, there are prophecies in the Christian
No,
Bible.
Can anybody hear me?
Yep.
Gentlemen,
Moses, I can
hold on
hear
a
you.
second. Hold on a second. Just for a little bit of
Yeah,
housekeeping.
so I believe that every prophecy is conditional. Every promise is conditional. Every curse is conditional. I believe
Moses said in
Shaman.
Deuteronomy.
Hold on, guys. What do you got, Spin?
Sarah is having a problem coming back in. There's something going on.
Okay.
I believe we are still live. I'm not sure. I'm trying to help her out a
can
little
check
bit.
for
She
you.
typed it in the
I can
chat.
check.
So, gentlemen, just
Mind your P's and Q's kind of thing.
yes, please.
Very
please.
good.
we're off the
No
air.
problem. We'll be here for you.
We're
All right, anyways, look, I do have to go, but I mean, thanks for everything. That you've been very cordial and very respectful.
Yeah,
But thank
absolutely.
you guys.
Yeah.
Be well. Take it easy.
All right,
Okay.
brother man.
Hey,
People are saying in the chat we are still live. So
Yeah, I was about to tell you. I just checked right now. We're still live, and actually, we're still live on Rabbi Israel's too, as well.
okay. Well, I'm just letting you know she put it in the chat. I know you guys were having a conversation.
Yeah, well,
so
Clay and I is not bad.
Yeah, we
no,
can do it.
I know Show put in the back chat. Can anybody hear him? And I said no. I don't
we
even
can't
know if
hear
he's
Shu.
still here.
We're having technical issues, guys.
No, just kick him in, make group because I can't make him come back in because
Nobody
we
can
can't
kick.
hear nothing.
Nobody
from him.
can kick. Nobody can kick.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
No.
Well,
Ben's not even here.
Well, let's
Ben's
keep the
not
show.
even here.
Let's keep the show going.
Yeah. Yeah. So we can give it. Look here, before we get into this. Look, chat. Okay.
Hi, Sarah. I was just telling everybody what you were saying, and I'm like, oh shit.
Yeah, no, it's okay. It's okay. It just I was sitting backstage and it wouldn't let me like pop on. Yosef, backstage, you'll need to do a quick cam up back there before I can let you up. If you are watching over on Israel's side, I'm going to go ahead and shut down his end for safety purposes, just in case anything wrong happens. If you would like to continue hanging out with us, we'll go a little bit longer. We are currently at the Gauntlet. That if you're on YouTube, that is at the Gauntlet Debate. That's where we are. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and close out on his end. So thank you for watching over on Israel's side and hanging out with us. We appreciate your audience and your comments. So
Sarah,
good night for now.
just while you